cities is, and one of the benefits is trying to bring together you all from different communities to where you can network and talk with one another rather than getting talked at or talked to. It's a great place to see what other cities are doing, learn from your other council members and peers in your other communities when we can do these events in person. And there's a few of you on here that that have experienced that. But we can bring together the folks down on the Mississippi River in the far west and go all the way up to Ashland. Seeing what Henderson and Owensboro are doing brings value to what Prestonsburg and Ashland and other doing throughout the state. So you all can work together. So we really do regret not being able to do these events in person, nor the academy later in January. But hopefully this summer we'll get back to in a situation where the executive order situation and other regulations allow us to participate together as a group, and it'll be safe to do so. I'm JD Cheney. I'm the executive director, CEO of the Kentucky League of Cities. First and foremost, congratulations on your election or reelection in some cases to city office. We're glad that you're able to join us here tonight to learn some of the basics about city government before you take office on January 1. And I mean that about learning some of the basics. It'll seem like a long night by the time it's over, but we're scratching the surface. And so we're trying to design this to introduce you to the League of Cities and also to tell you some of the laws you need to know before you go in to your first meeting. So maybe you'll stay out of the newspaper and you won't go and try to fire somebody that you don't have the power to fire right off the bat. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, I do want to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Kentucky League of Cities. First thing you need to understand is that it's your organization. It's not my organization. I'm just privileged to sit here for a little while due to the consent of your peers in elected city office throughout the state of Kentucky. We work for you. We're governed by elected officials just like you throughout the whole state. The Kentucky League of Cities is happy to start tonight for some of you all what I hope will be a long-lasting partnership. We have that already with your city governments, and we're not new to this business. We've been around since 1927. When 12 mayors across the state came together and formed the organization to serve as your chief advocate. We're still your chief advocate in Frankfort and in Washington, working for you. Later on, we got into the insurance business. We insure most of the cities on here, most of the cities in the state. Whenever you get those lawsuits, and those of you that have been around a while know that those lawsuits can pile up after a while. So we're in the insurance, we do finance, education and training. You're participating in one of those events tonight. We also answer legal inquiries, have a legal program, personnel services, other types of things that you would think of in a typical trade association, all designed to serve you all and to serve your interests. We work for you. And as I said before, we're governed by you all and your peers that are elected, 2,600 elected city officials, some appointed officials serve on there. We have 4 elected city official officers, a 17-member executive board composed of city officials that govern the operations of this association, and a 65-member board of directors, which determines their positions on policies that we take in Frankfort or in court or in Washington, D.C., advocating for you all. And the benefit, even though 65-member board sounds like a hard to wrangle when you're trying to figure out how to do 6 or 9 or 12 council members, it really does represent the state as a whole. It's a very diverse group. We ensure we have cities represented of all sizes, all the way from Louisville down to cities with a population of a couple of hundred. Regionally, in the east and the west and the north and the south, the different forms of government. and the different appointed officials, attorneys, city clerks, city attorneys, engineers, police chiefs, fire chiefs are all represented on that board, so we can form a unified voice and vision for the cities of the Commonwealth. We applaud you for the decision you've made to be a public servant. I know you didn't do it for the power and the pay. If you don't know what you get paid, you're probably going to be disappointed if you thought you were going to get rich in this job. No one that I know of ever in 20 years of meeting city officials has told me they've done it because they are interested in the money they're going to receive, or because they think they're going to wield a great deal of influence and power sitting in these seats. So you all are the true public servants, and that's the mission of our organization. It really is to serve those of you that have stepped up and decided to serve your community. Your goal is to make your community better, not to get rich or not to exercise a great deal of power. And our sole job is to support you in that endeavor, provide the resources that you need along the way. If you need legal counsel, you need us to change a law because it's been an obstacle to community improvement, to train you, to give you ideas. That's what we're here for. And you'll find that foundational to our entire organization is that we fundamentally believe that local decisions are best made by local leaders. We will not tolerate, or at least we'll go try to kill any piece of legislation that takes away your ability to govern your local community. You can count on that. Also, that proliferates into other parts of the organization, that you all are in the best position to make the decisions for those that elected you and entrusted you in this position. We do that with regard to the way we govern our insurance programs, our finance programs. We answer legal questions. We don't question your all's position to represent your all's community. So you're ours now, and we're yours, and we're going to have your back the whole way through your office and try to help you in any way that we can. I do have a couple of individuals with me tonight to talk a little bit more specifically about things that the league does. And so if you'll indulge for a couple of minutes, I'd like to introduce our Deputy Executive Director, Doug Goforth, to talk about in particular, the league's insurance and the finance programs. And this is really important. You're going to want to know about these things when you get sued. And I promise you, you're going to get sued. Doug?
Great. Thank you, JD. And I just want to say it's good to be with you all this evening, and congratulations again on your election. And the entire team here at KLC is really excited to be able to work with each of you as you help move your city forward. One thing that we found out over the years is that, great things happen when cities work together. We are better together. And I want to talk a little bit about the insurance programs and the finance programs. And I'm trying to do this not in a way that comes across as salesy, but it's informative. Most of you already participate in the insurance programs. And so I want to give you a little update about them. The insurance programs really started in the late 1980s when the traditional insurance market basically decided that they didn't want to write municipal risk anymore. And KLC and several of our member cities got together and formed KLC Insurance Services that writes liability, properties, workers' comp. Started with about 13 members, and today's grown to over 500. We insure about $6 billion of property values throughout the state, and cover about 15,000 city employees. And the program is designed just for what your city does every day. And so for that, and we really do call it a program. It is much more than just a policy. It's about developing sidewalk safety programs. We have safety grants twice a year. We have 4 firearm simulator program And I hope each of you get to do this. They go throughout the state 51 out of the 52 weeks each year. And it really gives you an opportunity to see what the men and women in blue go through. And I think the name's a little bit of a misnomer. It says firearms simulator, but it's really about decision making. It's as much about when not to use force, how to deal with diminished capacity, and so that the first time that an officer encounters a very tense situation, that it is not out on the street in your community, it is actually there where they can get some feedback from some other officers on how they're supposed to deal with that. So we also have model policies and disaster recovery programs. And our entire staff is only a phone call away. Even if it's in the middle of a UK basketball game and saying that there's a cyber attack, because we've had that happen too, we're going to make sure to take care of you in that. So I want to talk about the Health Insurance Trust. It's a fully insured health program. We partner with Anthem for that. There's a little over 200 participating members. The last two renewals, the average rate of increase has been 2%. We think that's pretty good considering the inflation for health. We may have either gotten lucky or been just ahead of the curve when it came to the pandemic. A few years ago, we rolled out a program called Healthiest You. It's a telemedicine program. So every employee and dependent that is on their policy has available on their cell phone or on the internet to be able to call a doctor 24/7, 365, and to call in prescriptions and things. And so that's been utilized quite heavily. It was used quite heavily before, but much more heavily since March. The finance programs, that's another example of where cities work together. And so far, there's been just over 1.6 billion in city projects that have been financed. And the current bond rating is AA-. And you say, why is that important? There's only 10 cities that have individual bond ratings in the state that are higher than that. And that bond rating ties directly into the cost of funds for your projects. So all of these are great options for you, and I'd encourage you, and we've had just over probably 200 cities that have actually participated in these finance programs. The board members for the KLC Insurance Services, the Health Trust, and the finance boards are just like what JD mentioned earlier. They're made up of your peers, of elected and appointed officials throughout the state. Our staff is kind of spreads from Hazard to Hopkinsville, from Northern Kentucky to Somerset and Corbin, and all areas in between. So we like to be available, and we like to come out and visit as well. And hopefully we'll get back on pace with that a little more as these vaccines continue to roll out. So, you know, these programs were created to be there whenever your city really needs them. They've been very successful, and it's really been successful because of the support and participation and feedback that we get from each of you and each of your member cities to make sure that we keep hitting the mark on exactly what you need. So I really enjoyed my time, and you all enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. And we also have our manager for member relations, Terry Johnson, to talk with you a little bit about some of the other membership programs that KLC offers that you can use to assist you throughout your term of office. Terry.
Thank you, JD, and hello, everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces. And I've already had the pleasure of speaking with some of you new folks, so we really look forward to getting to see you in person and getting to know you. And as JD said, I'm going to go through some of the things that are part of your membership. So I'm going to jump in here and share my screen and do a little PowerPoint to go over some of these things. First of all, as Doug and JD have said, I mean, you're the reason we're here. You're the reason we create the programs that we have. We want KLC to be your first call. And those of you who've been involved with us for a while know that, you know, we can pretty much answer your questions if you give us a call. And we want you new folks to know that we're here for you, as Doug said, 24/7. So jumping right into some of the services, as JD mentioned, you're participating in one right now, training and education. Our team is very nimble. They did 40 sessions between March and June because our members needed information about COVID. So they've definitely mastered the art of doing virtual learning. But what we love to do, of course, is in-person learning, and we do dozens of training sessions a year. So you'll be hearing a lot more about that. You know, we promote those in our communications to you, and you'll be hearing a lot more about the ones that are coming down the pike. Many of you who've been with us for a while have been to our conference. We do an annual conference. Next year it will be in Northern Kentucky. Last year we had almost 800 people involved with the conference. So it's just a great place to learn, to network, to get good resources. So we will look forward to seeing you there in September. We do several other types of larger events, summits around issues like alcoholic beverage control, code enforcement. This year we'll be adding an economic development summit. And this picture you see over here is of our safety conference. We do an annual safety conference for your frontline safety folks. And so that's always a very popular and well-attended program. So again, we try to cover all the bases for what folks in cities need. We do monthly events. We have started a program called City Advantage trainings, and they are monthly, and they are very interesting, and they are free. Again, you'll see more information about those programs in the communications that we send you. So we design content just for you, and you really can't get the content anyplace else that you can get at KLC because we do design it just for you. We have a big event coming up next month called our Virtual City Officials Academy. Normally it's not virtual, but it is next month. And so we hope that you'll sign up for that because it will be a lot more information about a lot more things that JD and Morgan are going to touch on today, plus a lot of other things. So that is on our website right now at the top of the page. Jumping on into community and economic development, this is an emerging area for us. We've always had community development, but members have told us that economic development is something that we need to do more of. And so we have an expert staff in that area. They can help you with economic development assistance. They can help you with city project management if there's something you need to get off the ground or you need to get finished up. They can help with community, strategic, and business planning. They can help you if you have a key hire you need to make in the city with consultation, coaching, and onboarding, and they have special skills and training in all these areas. And they can also help you with community engagement, meeting facilitation. If you're going to have a big, huge meeting in the city with 1,000 people and you kind of don't really know how to get started on all that, they can help you with that kind of thing too. In the Member and Business Relations Department, which is the department I'm in, there are a lot of services that we provide that members use really every day. If you go to our website and go to these two tabs at the top, Member Services and More, you'll see in the drop downs some information about some programs that we have partnered with businesses. We highly vet businesses and provide you with special programs that cities use every day. I mean, an example of that is the Reach Alert program. That is a mass communication system that cities use every day to communicate with their constituents. There's an IT in a box program, and that's just what it sounds like. It's a menu of services for technology, including things like web development, cybersecurity, document management, that kind of thing. So there are a number of programs. If you'll go to the website and go to the drop downs there, that you'll see that, again, were created just for our members. Over on the right-hand side of the website is a section called More, and there's just a whole lot of different things in that too. We have a page where you can post jobs. We have a page where you can post RFPs and RFQs, and that's new. So I hope people will start using that because, you can post your RFPs at no charge and just direct people to that if you'd like. We have a page for grants that we update weekly. And we also have a page for awards. We love to celebrate you and recognize you. So every year we give away, we name City Employee of the Year, City Official of the Year, and City Government of the Year. And those are really very prestigious. Nominations come in, and you can actually nominate for those awards for 2021 right now if you'll go to our website. Then one other last thing I wanted to mention was we're doing more work in the area of just sort of emerging issues. When Doug and JD have been talking to city officials this year, the issue of homelessness has come up a lot. So that's something that we've researched and we've put together some information. And I want to give a shout out to Rob Meinrich, who's on this webinar from Richmond, because when I started working on this issue, the first person I called was him, because I live in Richmond and I wanted to talk to my local city officials about the issue. So that kind of started, a project of doing a lot of research and talking with a lot of people around Kentucky about this. So we'll be rolling out some resources in that area shortly after the first of the year, and that will then evolve into some education and other things too. But we'll be looking at more of those kinds of things. The other thing too is we like to connect you, and as JD mentioned, I mean, normally you'd be able to connect more in a little bit better being in person at this event, but we have virtual ways to do that. I know some of you are new mayors and are participating in our mayor to mayor peer program, and we have listservs for city attorneys. We have other things like that we're working on to connect you. So we like to be able to do that. So in closing, KLC works for you. Just to reiterate what Doug said, we insure more municipalities than all other carriers combined in Kentucky. Very successful program. If you don't already know, you will quickly learn that KLC is the strongest voice you have in Frankfort and in Washington. We have a very successful legislative team who's working for you every day, not just during the session. More than half of all of our cities have used the KLC finance programs. And as Morgan and JD will demonstrate here shortly, our municipal law team is just second to none. They are the most knowledgeable municipal law people in Kentucky. So we know that you will give them a call for sure, because they're your go-to. So again, we hope to see you at the virtual Academy next month, City Officials Academy. I couldn't get it out. And again, we want to be your first call. We are on social media, so we hope you'll join us there. And we just look forward to working with you next year and beyond. So congratulations to everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Terry. With that, we will head on into the nuts and bolts of the training session. If I can figure out how to share my screen. That, let Get my ugly face hidden so I don't have to look at myself. And now we're ready to go. I hope throughout this, I'm going to do the first part and Morgan's going to do the second part of this presentation. I hope that you will feel free to unmute if you have questions. Feel free to ask them. You can use that chat function. I'm not great at seeing those, but I think Morgan will watch and let me know if there's any questions in the chat functions if you want to type them in. But the more interactive, in my opinion, the better it is. We want you to just know some of the basics. You don't have to be an expert in this area. I think that's one of the beautiful things about city government is that if we ask you all what you did, some of you would say dental hygienist, banker, lawyer, school teacher. You are the normal citizens, and it really is a great way to look at representative democracy, to be governed by your peers and neighbors in this city office. Even though that's a beautiful thing, it also can be challenging or intimidating, and we don't think it should be intimidating. We think it's honorable that you stepped up, but you don't need to be an expert in all of this. Just some basic knowledge. You have city clerks and city attorneys and city finance officers and others that can help guide you along the way, and that's what the league's here for too, to take some of the mystery away from that. So that way you can concentrate on what you were elected to do, which is to make your community a better place. So as we go along, please feel free to ask any questions. But the first thing we ought to cover is the oath of office. And some of you probably already done that and promised and swore that you haven't fought any duels with deadly weapons or carried any challenges to doing that. If you haven't, you're in for a treat. When you do Kentucky's constitutional oath for entering the office of a city official. Every city official has to take the same oath, Section 228 of the Kentucky Constitution. And the law is very particular about how that is supposed to occur. You have to take the oath of office on or before the day your term of office begins. So on or before January 1st, you have to get the oath. Now, this varies from community to community. Some cities do a swearing in ceremony. Some cities don't. Ultimately, the responsibility is yours to ensure that the oath of office is taken, that you take the oath of office on or before the first. You can, and the big deal here is that the law provides that if you fail to take that oath of office in time, it can result in a failure or a forfeiture of the office. So we had a situation several years ago where none of the council took the oath of office. And about mid-January, the mayor tried to get rid of the entire city council for its failure to do so. That situation worked out, but it's not something you want to play with. You can go out and find your own judge, any district, circuit, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court judge, any federal judge on senior status or retired status is authorized to do so. Any notary is authorized. The mayor is authorized to administer the oath to council members and commissioners inside the city governments. Judge executive, any member of the General Assembly can administer the oath. If they're a sitting member of the General Assembly, they could administer the oath. The circuit court clerk is authorized to administer the oath as well. So you find one of those individuals to administer the oath, and then you're good. Now, you may end up taking that oath of office more than once. That's a good news. Just be sure it's done one time prior to January 1 or on January 1. Don't wait if the city's going to do a ceremony on January 10th or whatever date. If they're not going to do that, you can take it again ceremoniously as many times as you want to. You can wake up every day, look in the mirror, promise yourself not to carry a challenge to fight a duel. If you want to do it, you can take it as many times. Just be sure you do it one time on or before January 1. On Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, one or the other, I can't remember which day, we got an opinion confirming our legal opinion that you may take the oath of office virtually. You don't have to appear in person. So that confirmation from Attorney General Cameron their legal interpretation was correct, that virtual swearing in is perfectly permissible. Some offices have to appear in person before the officiant, and city offices do not require that. So you can do it virtually. You can use FaceTime, Zoom, whatever platform you want to use. Are there any questions about the oath of office?
Yes, JD, there is one from Dale Perry and Stamping Ground. If we are an appointed member of a code enforcement board, does the swearing in vacate that position, or do they need to submit an official resignation letter to the clerk? The commission does not, the code enforcement board does not meet again this year.
And neither does my commission. Yeah.
Dale, so yeah, as you know, the statutes don't permit an elected city official to serve. So you can submit your resignation prior to doing so. But if you don't want to submit that to the city, you shouldn't have to. It would operate when you take the oath for city commission. It would operate to vacate the first, even without the submission of the resignation.
Thank you. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
No problem. That it on oath? That's good. All right, we'll move right along and get into the city governments. I could talk for hours and hours about this. If you've ever heard me talk about home rule and the relationship between the city and state government and federal government. And I just want to confirm probably what you already know, which is the supreme law of the land argument. You know, our federal constitution and our state constitutions, the federal constitutions and the laws enacted by Congress pursuant to the Constitution or necessarily implied in the Constitution are the supreme law of the land across the United States. Likewise, have similar supremacy of state constitution and state laws enacted pursuant to the state constitution are the supreme laws of the Commonwealth. And those sometimes preempt the ability for cities to be able to govern in certain areas. But in Kentucky, we have a legal principle known as home rule. If you haven't heard it before, you'll get to know it, but it's similar to the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, except it's done by statute. If you remember the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it says that the federal government only has such powers as are enumerated in the Constitution or necessarily implied, and any power not granted to the federal government is expressly reserved to the states. In Kentucky, we don't have a similar constitutional provision for Kentucky cities in terms of their relationship with the state government. However, we do have by statute a legal concept that is just axiomatic and a principle of local self-governance, that cities have the ability to make local decisions locally, and that does not occur in every state. Prior to 1980, when we got home rule, city governments, U.S. city officials, had to go through the statutes and make sure the General Assembly in a state law said it was okay, enacted some law. Say you wanted to enact a leash law, smoking ban, sidewalk ordinance. You had to make sure somewhere in state statute that the General Assembly had granted you the authority to act in that area. Well, in 1980, we were granted home rule authority, which is just the opposite of that. It says that you have the ability to act in furtherance of a public purpose on behalf of your constituents, as long as that does not conflict with any state law or federal law or the state constitution. So instead of looking for permission now, you're looking to make sure that the General Assembly hasn't gone and enacted a law that prevents you from acting. And there's probably about 25 areas out there where city action is preempted, such as creating moving motor violations. You can't enact ordinances that govern the propagation of seeds. You can't, that's a Farm Bureau bill from several years ago. You can't enact ordinances that prohibit the mother from breastfeeding in public. there's a few little preemptive statutes out there that prevent you from acting, but it's so much nicer to know that you're in a position to be able to make these decisions without having to go and get permission every single time, or ensure that the General Assembly had previously granted permission for you all to act. And that concept is known as home rule. You just remember, you can act in the interest of your public that you serve, as long as that action does not conflict with state law and obviously federal law. Power of local officials to make decisions at the local level. That is what home rule is all about. You can't change state law by enacting a local ordinance. Sometimes cities try to do that, to say, well, we don't really like that state law, we're going to change it here in our city boundaries. And so that's this concept. Your limitation on your power with the state is you can't modify state law. The third bullet point that I'll cover here briefly is that the county government isn't your boss. Sometimes you get judge executives or magistrates, or the county fiscal court decides or feels for whatever reason that they have some kind of superiority complex instead of an inferiority complex. County governments don't govern cities in Kentucky. Sometimes there's a misperception that that is the case. They're not a superior unit of government. The county judge and magistrates are governing a county government that's a co-equal to the city. They're both co-equal units of local government. And the way I remember this in my house, my 5-year-old little girl tells my 14-year-old little girl all the time that she is not the boss of her. So just remember, the county's not the boss of you. This county cannot enact ordinances requiring the city to do to perform certain tasks. We've seen that happen before. One caveat is that county-wide ordinances, if they govern a certain topic other than telling the city what to do, then the county ordinance has application throughout the entire boundaries of the county, including the city limits. So I keep using leash law as the example because I'm getting to meet everybody's pets with all this Zoom meeting going on. If you enact a leash law, if the county government enacted a leash law, the leash law would even apply within the municipal boundaries of all the cities in that county, unless the city had an ordinance addressing the same subject matter and impose the same or more stringent standards. Then the county's ability to enforce its ordinance in municipal boundaries would then be dissolved. It's kind of a reverse preemption kind of argument. And then the last bullet point on this slide addresses the idea of city classifications. We're about 5 or 6 years removed now from the General Assembly finally doing away with the archaic classification system. You'll still hear referred to sometimes, I'm a third-class city or a second-class city. In Kentucky, there are only 2 classes of cities, and it's first class and home rule class. Besides Louisville, every city is considered to be in the home rule class. Louisville has the powers of both a county and the first class city. It's the only one that has that. And then of course, Lexington has the powers. And I know we have a couple of folks from Lexington on. Lexington has the powers of a county and all the powers of a home rule class city. There are a few vestiges left in the law that you're probably going to encounter. The primary one of those is that the ability to impose a restaurant tax harkens back to that old classification system, even though they were repealed. So only the old 4th and 5th class cities are authorized to do that, and that frustrates several communities around the state. Elizabethtown and Radcliffe is a good example. Radcliffe was an old 2nd class city. Elizabethtown, it's not. It frustrates Radcliffe. Why can Elizabethtown do this and we can't? That's a vestige from the old law. I also use, since I know some Berea and Richmond people are on, Berea and Richmond is another example of that. Why can Berea do it and Richmond can't? That's something we're trying to address to get that old vestige of the law. Our legislative goal is to just give you all as elected officials at least the option to be able to govern yourself without any of those done. And that's pretty much, that's besides a couple of exceptions related to police and fire, those are the only few remaining vestiges from that city classification system. But that'll hopefully be out of the vocabulary, city class, over the next decade or so altogether. Does anybody have any questions about that slide?
JD, Councilwoman Swift from Munfordville has a question that is going to warm your heart. She wants to know what the KRS for home rule is.
KRS 82.082. I'm forgetting a bunch of these statutes in this new job, but I won't forget that one. Thank you for that softball. All right, then we'll head on to the forms of city government. And this is where we get to the guts of it all, about what your powers and roles and responsibilities are. But first, you need to kind of take a survey of what the differences are among city governments in Kentucky. By far, the most common form of government in Kentucky is the mayor-council plan of government. Most of Kentucky cities are governed under this system. It's what we'll talk about first. And then the second most common is the commission plan of government. And the third most common is a city manager plan. We have representatives from all three of those. There are 19 cities in Kentucky that are governed under the city manager plan. Usually they're larger cities, but I see Frankfort, Richmond, I think Corbin is organized under that form of government. We have one city that's organized under the Consolidated Local Government Statutes. That is Louisville. That's what governs the city of Louisville. One city in Kentucky governed under what's called the Urban County Government Model. That's the city of Lexington. And then you see three more below here, and there are approximately 0 cities that use any of those three forms of government. The mayor-alderman plan would be available for the largest city in a county if they wanted to adopt that form of government. If the county had a population more than 250,000, we're a long way from that. Bowling Green and Owensboro are a long way from being able to do that, and I doubt they would adopt that plan even if they did qualify. But nevertheless, it's on the statute. And the other two, I do want to mention, because they bring up the topic of merger. And every year around election time, there's always a great deal of discussion about how to create efficiencies and whether we ought to merge city and county government and how that would occur. And sometimes that discussion really is great for a community to have. But the only thing I want you to remember from tonight about these is if you're thinking about talking about merging government, or that your judge executive gets that longing look in their eye and they want to talk about merger, do not just walk, run. If they say, let's talk about forming a charter county government, that statutory scheme, which is available in the context of discussing merger, allows the county to control the whole process, allows the judge to make more appointments, to govern the way the discussions go. If you are going to engage in any discussions with the county about unifying or merging city and county government, you need to talk about that in the context of the unified local government statutes. If you're going to do that, that allows the city to play an equal part to the county government in those discussions about merger. So anything from this slide, you remember the most common is mayor council, but on the charter county unified, just remember, don't dance with the county under the charter county government statutes, because you're at the end of the day, you're going to get dumped, and the city won't be adequately represented in the context of that. So that's the only reason I kept those on there. So let's talk a little bit about the different plans of government and how that fleshes out in terms of powers and responsibilities. And for the individuals on from Lexington tonight, Lexington, your charter styles your all's form of government very similar, almost exactly to the mayor council plan of government. And that's what you all will be wanting to pay the closest attention to in terms of the form of government. So for the Lexington people, this first one most closely resembles your all's form of government. This one is almost it's very much what you're familiar with. It's very intuitive. When you studied civics back in high school or middle school or whenever, the three branches of government, this form of government has two separate branches of government, not three. Nobody has three branches of government. In terms of city governments in Kentucky, we have a unified state court judiciary, but this plan of government, mayor, council, and urban county council, has very distinct forms of executive power and legislative power, and they're not shared. And just like you remember with the governor and the General Assembly, the president and Congress, executive power is held by the mayor in the mayor council form of government. The mayor is the CEO in the mayor council plan of government, CEO of the city, chief executive officer, ultimately responsible for the administration of the day-to-day of the city, and the legislative power is held by the city council. And as you'll see in this form of government, this has a built-in tension when you have separate executive and legislative authority in two different bodies. That's a built-in tension. You see it going on right now with the federal government. You see it playing out right now in state government between the governor and the General Assembly. It has built-in tension when you have two separate branches of government. But as you'll see, it's very important that the mayor and the council figure out a way to work together, or else you're not going to be able to efficiently manage the affairs of the city. And you'll see how that works as we go through some of the details. In the mayor council form of government, the mayor is responsible for the appointment, supervision, discipline, and termination of city non-elected officers and employees. So the very first thing here is non-elected officers and employees. We have two different groups, and it's important to distinguish between the two of those. Let's define non-elected officers. Does anybody know, or can you name who the non-elected city officers? Obviously, the mayor, the council, and commissioners are all elected city officers. Who are the non-elected city officers in your city? Somebody, anybody?
City clerk.
City clerk,
Public Works.
Public Works could be. I thought I saw Stapleton's name pop up there to say controller or comptroller.
Chief.
The fire chief,
Administrator.
city administrator.
Police
Zoning board?
Pardon?
Police chief.
Zoning board?
Zoning board? No, those aren't considered non-elected city officers. Those are officers on those boards. In Kentucky, state law requires that you treat the city clerk, the police chief, the fire chief, if he or she is not a volunteer fire chief, a city administrator, and in the city manager form of government, the city manager as a non-elected office. State law says that those five are automatically, no matter what, considered a non-elected city office. But those of you that called out other positions may not be wrong, because state law also permits the city by ordinance to create other non-elected offices. In many cities, the position of city attorney, the position of city engineer, chief financial officer, they may be designated as non-elected officers too, but you know, under state law, you have to treat the clerk, the police chief, fire chief, if he or she is not volunteer, the city administrator and the city manager all have to be treated as non-elected officers. And the reason this is important in the mayor council form of government, mayor's ability to appoint, supervise, discipline, and terminate is limited. The appointment power is limited for non-elected officers. So if the mayor and the mayor council form of government wants to appoint someone to serve as city clerk, council has to approve that process prior to the appointment. Just like the president, when he nominated Supreme Court justice, he picked who he wanted, and the Senate ultimately had to confirm. And for non-elected offices in this mayor council form of government, the clerk, the police chief, the council, the mayor would pick, but the council would have to confirm. If the council does not confirm the appointment of a non-elected officer, then that person cannot serve in that role. So this is a limitation on the mayor's authority for appointment for these non-elected city officers. That is not the case when it comes to positions of employment. When it comes to positions of employment, the mayor has a unilateral right to appoint, supervise, discipline, and terminate in the mayor council form of government. Without council, with a couple of exceptions related to police and fire, there's a law called the Police Officer Bill of Rights that would come into play, and in some places you've adopted a civil service system. But there, as a general rule, the mayor has that unilateral authority, except when it comes to non-elected officers. So a good example of this would be a clerk position is vacant for the city clerk. The mayor would pick who they wanted to be city clerk, submit that name to the council, and the council would vote it up and down. If the council voted it up, that person would move into the clerk position. That would not be the case for deputy clerk, because it's not a non-elected city office. For deputy clerk, the mayor would pick who, if there was a vacancy in the position, whoever he or she wanted to serve in that role without any council or legislative interference in that appointment. Once a non-elected officer is appointed, they serve indefinitely. If the mayor decides they want to discipline or terminate that non-elected officer, council doesn't have a role anymore. You can think of this very similar to the situation with the president on appointing cabinet positions. If the president selects someone to be the attorney general of the United States, yes, the Senate has to confirm it, but when the president wants to terminate that person, the Senate doesn't have any additional role. Likewise, that works the same way here for mayor with non-elected officers. And for employees, it totally is within the purview of the mayor in the mayor council form of government. The mayor and the mayor council form of government is responsible for preparing, presenting, and administering. So prepare, present, and administer the city's budget. There are 3 verbs there. There's one important verb that's missing. Anybody tell me what that is? Prepare, present,
Approve.
approve or adopt. That's a council function. So the mayor and the mayor council form of government is supposed to put together what he or she thinks the budget needs to be, present that to the council at least 30 days prior to the start of the fiscal year. And then the council gets to decide what they want to do with that. They could defer to it. In a lot of cases, the council does defer because the mayor's a CEO, runs the operations of the city. That's what happens with the governor and the General Assembly. In most circumstances, that the governor prepares and the General Assembly takes it in large part and adopts it. But the council could throw it in the trash can. It may make for good kindling for a fire if the council doesn't like it at all. And that's happened from time to time because the responsibility for determining what's in the budget ultimately rests with the council. But once the council approves it or adopts it, enacts it, the budget by ordinance, it goes back to the mayor and the mayor council form of government for the administration. So once, for example, the council puts in the budget that they want to spend $100,000 to make repairs at City Hall, the mayor then on that last bullet point has the ability to go out and enter into contracts and execute contracts subject to procurement laws, which we're going to talk a little bit later, any contract in order to administer that budget. So council's involvement is to determine what's going to be appropriated, and then the mayor goes out and executes that in this form of government. The mayor has a responsibility for the approval or veto of city ordinances in the mayor council plan. You won't find this in cities that are governed under the city manager plan or the commission plan of government. Only in the mayor council plan is this veto authority, approval or veto responsibility. And again, this looks a lot like the governor and the General Assembly, the president and the Congress. To approve the ordinance that's enacted by the city council, all the mayor has to do is sign it. Pretty simple. In order to veto an ordinance, the mayor has to take additional action in order to do a veto. Now, if the mayor does not sign the ordinance after 10 days after the council's enacted, it will become effective without his or her signature. But if the mayor wants to veto the ordinance, he or she has 10 days after the date that the council enacts it to not sign it and send it back to the council with a written statement of his or her objections to the ordinance. And then that effectuates a veto of the ordinance. Now, what can the council do if it disagrees with the mayor's veto? Anybody got any idea? Just like
Majority vote to pass it.
just like Congress and just like the General Assembly, the legislative body, in this case, the council, has the authority to override the veto. And the council can override the veto by a vote of one more than a majority of the entire membership within 2 meetings after the mayor's returned it in the veto. So you got a time limit. The mayor has 10 days in order to not sign it and send it back. The council, if the mayor does veto it, has 2 meetings from the date that it has been vetoed to vote by one more than a majority of the entire membership to override the veto. So let's do some math. If you have 6 members of council is the most common in Kentucky, although we have places like Middlesboro on with 9, and we have some cities with 12. If you have a 6-member council, how many votes does it take to override a mayoral veto? 5. You have a 12-member council, how many votes does it take to override a mayoral veto?
7.
How many?
7?
Try again.
8. If you
8.
had 12. 8.
8. One more than a majority of the entire membership. That's what it takes. You have 2 meetings in order to be able to do that. Again, I'll emphasize, just so you don't get confused in the manager plan and commission plan of government, that you do not have the authority to override. The mayor doesn't have the authority in those forms of government to veto ordinances. And for the Lexington folks, this is set up similar in Lexington. The mayor does have the ability to veto and the council override. In the mayor council form of government, the mayor may only vote in order to break a tie. The mayor is not considered a member of the legislative body. It's true in Lexington as well. The mayor can only cast a vote in the instance that the council has a tie issue, a tie on an ordinance, a tie on a procedural motion, any tie with the exception of some planning and zoning laws. In order to override a planning commission recommendation, the mayor has the ability, and it uses the word may, not shall. It doesn't require the mayor to break a tie. It gives the mayor the ability to break a tie if he or she elects to do so. So what happens if the mayor doesn't want to break the tie and it's 3-3?
Go back and discuss it and come to an agreement, figure out what the problem is.
Yeah, it fails for lack of a majority at the end of the day. So if the mayor refuses to break that tie or that impasse, it fails for lack of a majority to be able to proceed on it. And you're right, Dale, you'd end up having to, if you want action on it, you'd have to go back and discuss it and bring it back at a later date when the mayor was willing to cast a vote or try to get a majority on the council to do it. State law also assigns the mayor responsibility for presiding over meetings of the council. So state law says that the mayor shall be the presiding officer over the council. What happens, and this always happens, not always, but every now and then it happens where the city thinks the mayor really stinks at presiding. Can you enact an ordinance that takes away that right from the mayor?
No,
No.
No. Why not?
he's the chief officer.
Go back to the very first slide. You cannot
You
change
can't override state.
law. That's perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
Can't change state law by local ordinance, and state law says the mayor is a presiding officer. The mayor has the authority to also, as a presiding officer, to call special meetings of the city council. So the That's a responsibility of the mayor, one of the responsibilities. But if the mayor doesn't want to, you'll see that the council, majority of the council also has the ability to call special meetings if the mayor refuses to do so. The mayor is responsible for providing for the orderly continuation of government if he or she is going to be absent. Now, this isn't used as frequently since we have these cell phones now. Most mayors don't do an executive order just because they're leaving town or even leaving the country, because they can stay connected. But in situations where there may be an incapacity, and you'd be surprised with 416 cities, at least it occurs once or twice a year somewhere around Kentucky, where there's a period of incapacity. The mayor does need to have some executive order for an employee or non-elected officer to manage the city in the event he or she becomes incapacitated. If the mayor is in a situation where they can't attend the meeting, the mayor does not get to decide who governs the meeting in the mayor council plan of government in his or her absence. Instead, that falls to the council. The council has to pick one person from the council who would preside over the council meeting in the mayor's absence. The mayor doesn't get to decide who that is. It has to be an elected council member. So the council would pick another council member to preside if the mayor was not able to attend or was absent from the meeting.
That'd be a mayor pro tem.
So the mayor pro tem does not exist in this mayor council form of government. Now, some mayor council in a legal sense, some councils may call it that. It does not exist in the legal sense like it does in Maysville. It's a city manager form of government in Maysville. So you have to have it. Nicholasville is a city commission city, one of the examples of a city commission city. Those have to have a mayor pro tem. We'll talk about that under those forms of government. But the mayor council form of government does not have that position, or legally required to have that position. And what you may find is that the council selects somebody who would preside whenever the mayor's not there in advance of that absence, and go ahead and designate somebody. You can call them mayor pro tem, you can call it vice mayor, you can call it grand poobah of the city, whatever you want to title, you want to slap on an advanced selection of somebody to preside over, but it does not.
I always thought it was the person who received the second highest votes when I worked for the city years ago. And we called that the mayor pro tem.
Well, and you're from Maysville, right?
Right,
Well, Maysville is governed under the city manager plan. And
exactly.
in your instance, the city manager plan, you do have to have a mayor pro tem.
Exactly.
In the council form of government, you do not have to have a mayor.
Okay.
You can call it whatever you want to, and you don't even have to have anybody in that position. Now, for the Lexington folks, your urban county charter does require you to designate a vice mayor in order to have that, which is a little bit of a distinction there. So we've gone over the mayor's powers and authorities. What are the roles and responsibilities of the city council? And the legislative functions, again, are vested in this council to enact ordinances and regulations. So anything you're doing to control the conduct of the public is going to roll through the city council. A lot of the city's actions are done through ordinance enactment, including budgeting, annexation, adoption of ethics ordinance. Things along those lines are legislative functions. And the most important legislative function is to provide the revenue and determine how that revenue is going to be spent to deliver the services you're obligated or prioritized to provide to your citizens. So that second bullet point, second and third bullet points, it really points to the fact that the legislative body, the council, controls the purse strings. So first of all, you have the authority to determine what taxes you're going to levy. You're going to decide whether you're going to do an insurance premium tax or an occupational tax, or what you're going to set your property tax rate at, what taxes are going to be levied and at what rates in conformity with state law, to be able to bring revenues in to pay the people or pay for the projects that you deem important. And the council's the one that determines what those spending priorities are through the adoption of an annual budget. You decide how the money is going to be appropriated and how it's going to be spent in the annual budget, which is the most important function of the city legislative body. So as we mentioned before, and you see this symbiotic relationship, yeah, the mayor gets to appoint employees and non-elected officers. Council is responsible for establishing other non-elected officers beyond those 5 that are required, and employment positions. This frustrates mayors sometimes because they can't just say, well, I'm going to hire my campaign manager to be mayor's special assistant for $100,000 a year. The council, in order for the mayor to pick somebody to fill a position, the councils had to create the position, the employment position, and pay and classification plan. As mentioned before, if the mayor is going to appoint somebody to a non-elected office, the council is responsible for approving that mayoral appointment. The compensation for those non-elected officers and employees is determined by the council. It's a legislative action. Every single city in Kentucky, regardless of your form of government, is required to have a pay and classification plan ordinance. And so it's the council that determines what employees are going to be paid in that pay and classification plan ordinance. So if you're newly elected, or even if you're a veteran and been around for a while, it's always good to get a copy of your pay and classification plan ordinance and be familiar with that. And that's done differently in different types of cities. In some cities, like in Ashland or Frankfurt, you're going to probably have a much more comprehensive pay and classification plan, Hopkinsville, than you may in a city the size of Sadieville. I see the folks from Sadieville are on. In Sadieville, they may deal with that pay and classification plan in their budget ordinance and simply list the positions and what they're going to get paid in the budget ordinance to comply with that requirement. But keep in mind, it's the council that determines what the pay is or what the range of pay is for each employment position. It's the council's responsibility also to set the compensation of elected city officers. And if I could see you in the same room, I always see somebody light up to think, whoa, we get to set our own compensation, and I'm going to give myself a raise come January. Don't get overly excited about that. Under Kentucky's Constitution, you cannot modify the compensation of an elected city official or any elected official, state or county either, during their term of office. So that prevents some shenanigans that you used to see prior to this being adopted, or you see in some states where the council says, man, the mayor really stinks. We're going to cut your pay in half. Do you do what we tell you, mayor? Or we're going to cut your pay in half, or we're going to give ourselves a big raise. In order to set the compensation for elected city officers, the council, the commission, this applies to all forms of government, has to do that by the first Monday in May in the year, at the latest, by the first Monday in May in the year that the officer would be elected. And you have to do that. If you look at that first Monday in May, that's before a primary election, that's before a general election. That probably explains why compensation is so low. The average compensation for mayors in Kentucky is about $5,000, between $5,000 and $6,000 a year. Compensation is pretty low because most people don't make those changes prior to the election. So, for example, if you wanted to change the compensation, you're a new commissioner, you wanted to change your compensation for the next term, you would have to set that by the first Monday in May at the latest of 2022, and it would go into effect January 1, 2023, if you make the election afterwards. If you get reelected, if you give yourself a big raise, and that keeps a lot of people from doing that. So,
Mr. Cheney,
yes.
is there statutory limits of how much they could set that for? Because that's come up a couple of times at ours, and I would hope it would not be a lot, because our city couldn't afford to go to where some of these people want to be compensated.
That's an excellent point. So let me expand. That's a great question. And so I'll expound upon that a little bit. The Kentucky Constitution also sets the maximum rate. And I believe it's $7,200, $7,500 for city officials outside of Louisville is the maximum that it's set. but that is in 1940 dollars. And so the courts have applied a rubber dollar theory to that and bring that amount up to its current value. So set at $7,200 in 1940, whatever it was, in 2020 dollars. I think that's around $75,000 or $76,000, 78. I think Morgan told me the other day. Somewhere in that range is the maximum compensation that could be paid. So hypothetically, in Stamping Ground, you could pay the mayor and members of the council $78,000 or around that number as a constitutional maximum. And also one more caveat on this rule, and you'll see while we're doing the thumbnail sketch here, we could talk about these things for a long time. One more caveat to that is that the prohibition in the Constitution on changing the compensation during the term of office, you could do COLA adjustments from 1 year over the next, if it is either approved specifically by the council, also the commission or board of commissioners. You can set it that way year over year. You can't take, oh, I got this ordinance from 1977 and it says we get paid $1,000. Let's take that up to $20. It has to be 1 year over the next. A lot of cities have addressed that proactively by automatically providing the COLA in the compensation ordinance, that it would automatically occur. If that's the case, some cities do it that way. That makes sense?
Thank you. We're the second largest city in Scott County, but we don't have that type of budget.
No problem. You're probably going to hit, and not many cities hit that, even for the mayor in those communities. State law requires that the council conduct regular meetings at least once a month, and a majority of the council can call special meetings. So if the mayor as presiding officer refuses to do so, the council can get together to call a special meeting. And then there's also the authority to investigate the activities of city government in the event that the council, just like Congress, the council wants to do an investigation. It's authorized, if it goes through the mayor, to get written reports or other things from city personnel. And that's the council powers and responsibilities. I have a caution sign up here, not a stop sign, but it seems like during election season or right after election season, almost inevitably we'll have a council member go in and try to fire the police chief or something like that. Personnel issues frequently end up in litigations. It's probably the most commonly litigated issues where you're making decisions related to employment law or personnel. And, even though Doug, I guess Doug may not still be on here, may prefer a stop sign, we have a caution sign. We're just telling you to slow down, get with your city attorney, seek legal advice, know your city's policies, all before you take personnel action to ensure you're doing it in the right way. It may seem crazy to say a council member goes and fires a police chief. We've had it happen on multiple occasions, attempt to do that. As council members, I think it's important to remember what your roles, and it's a legislative role as an individual council. So all that we went through is the powers of the council, but as an individual council member, how much power do you have? Any council members want to explain that?
I'm not sure.
You got the power of one vote on the council. There's no independent authority as a council member. You got to be meeting as a body, and you got to act as a council in order to exercise any legislative authority. And the council itself can't do many of these personnel things because that's vested in this mayor council form of government with the mayor. Now let's talk a little bit about commission and manager plan of government. And it's a little more complicated. It's simple, but it's still more complicated because it kind of defies logic. In this form of government, commission and manager plan, and I'm going to talk about them together, and then I'm going to talk about them separately. There isn't any separation of executive and legislative function at all. No separation of powers. All the legislative and all the executive authority is vested with the city commission in the commission form of government. Ultimate executive and legislative authority in the city manager form of government. is vested with the city board of commissioners. What's that mean? Sometimes to the frustration of the mayors in those cities, the mayor does not have the authority to veto ordinances. The mayor is considered a member of the legislative body and can propose and vote on legislation the same as any other commissioner. Remember, mayor council form of government, mayor could only vote to break a tie, didn't have the ability to introduce ordinances himself or herself. In this commission and manager plan, you got a mayor and 4 commissioners. And the mayor is a member of the legislative body, but doesn't have the power to veto ordinances, doesn't have that responsibility for day-to-day oversight and supervision of employees, isn't responsible. And you brought up the mayor pro tem, isn't responsible, because you got to have a mayor pro tem in these forms of government, which I'll talk about, to provide for the continuation of government. That's automatically taken care of under this form of government. Now, although mayors get frustrated in these forms of government sometimes for being known as ribbon cutters or glorified commissioners, the mayors do have some special powers assigned to them by statutes, and they're important. Presiding over the meetings of the commission or board of commissioners. State law says the mayor is the presiding officer when you meet as a commission or board of commissioners. The mayor, unlike in the mayor council form of government, has the authority to sign written obligation, notes, and bonds, not the authority to go out and make a contract to bind the city. But once it's been approved, the mayor is responsible for executing all notes, bonds, written obligations, contracts on behalf of the city. The mayor in this form of government is a presiding officer, commission and manager both, just like the mayor in the mayor council form of government as a presiding officer can call special meetings. And in some instances, depending on the state law or the board of commission, the mayor may have unilateral authority, even though no separate executive authority from a legal perspective. Statutes may say it's the mayor who decides who's appointed to some boards and commissions. There's a couple of utility commissions that are organized that way, not all of them throughout the state, if it's organized under certain statutes. And the most common one that you'll probably run into is the tourist and convention commissions. The mayor doesn't have to go back to the commission or the board of commissioners in selecting the individuals who are appointed to local tourism commissions. That's up to the mayor in this form of government as well. And then the last bullet point, to act as ceremonial head, a political head, it's undervalued. Yes, that may include the ribbon cutting and the speeches and the liaison with the governor's office and other things of that nature. But quite frequently, the mayor ends up being the political head of government. We've seen during this pandemic that the mayor could end up being the head of government if an emergency order is in place and you've declared an emergency. The mayor in these forms of government has the authority to issue executive orders in order to govern the community related to the state of emergency. If there's military law declared, the mayor becomes the head, even though on a day-to-day basis, the mayor doesn't possess those powers. I used to joke a lot about the glorified commissioner and chief ribbon cutter position. My old mayor in Richmond, who was president of the league, I spent a lot of time with him, looked at me one day when we were doing these trainings and he said, JD, don't you understand that nobody knows that there's different forms of city government besides you? And there's nobody else on the street that realizes that the mayor in one city has different powers than a mayor in another city. And he's right. He was right about that. The general public does not generally have an understanding that the mayor, there's a, commonly referred to in the commission and manager cities as weak mayors, that there's any difference a lot. So therefore the mayor in Richmond, the mayor in Frankfort, the mayor in Corbin and Ashland, and these cities organized under these forms of government are still going to get a whole lot of expectations from the citizens, and therefore they end up serving as a political head of the government because of what the expectations of the public are, and that's a very important role as well. So, what are the functions of the commission and board of commissioners in this form of government? In these forms of government, you guessed it, combined legislative and executive authority. So the commission and board of commissioners are responsible for enacting ordinances and regulations, levying taxes and fees, spending that money. So administering the budget. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the commission and board of commissioners. We'll talk about some variances in that, but at the end of the day, it's with the commission or board of commissioners. Conducting regular meetings once a month. You're required to meet once per month. Majority of the commission or board of commissioners, other than the mayor, has the authority to get together and call special meetings. Ultimately, the appointment, discipline, termination of employees and non-elected officers falls to the commission and the board of commissioners. The discipline and termination of non-elected officers falls with the board of commissioners. Establishment of the non-elected officers in the employment positions and ultimately deciding who's going to fill those positions is with the commission and board of commissioners. Setting the compensation of officers and employees, legislative function, deciding who's going to fill those positions goes back to the commission or board of commissioners. And in the commission and manager plan, Ms. Brammer, as you pointed out, unlike the mayor council plan, the commission and board of commissioners under state law is required to designate one commissioner to serve as mayor pro tem in these cities, if you're governed under these plans. And in the mayor's absence, the mayor pro tem acts for the mayor, possesses all the rights and powers and duties of the mayor in the mayor's absence. So if the mayor's not at the commission meeting or board of commissioners meeting, it's the mayor pro tem who presides. So this is generally done at the first meeting following the election, that the commission or board of commissioners decides who's going to be the mayor pro tem. Now, true or false, under Kentucky law, it has to be the highest vote getting commissioner.
False.
False. False is absolutely correct. Now, most Kentucky cities, by history or tradition, or just deciding they don't want to all out brawl at the first meeting, defers to tradition and gives it to the highest vote getter. But it's very important for you to understand, Kentucky law does not require that the commission or board of commissioners designate that mayor pro tem title to the highest vote getter. And we've seen it occur from time to time, but the vast majority of cities do give it to the highest vote getter, I think, to avoid the controversy, or that's been the history or tradition, but there's no legal obligation to do that. In the commission plan of government, so the city manager cities, you cover your ears on this because this is not what happens with you all. But in the commission plan of government, the second most common. So I'm looking at Nicholasville, Smiths Grove, trying to see who else is commissioned, Camargo, maybe, Arlington. You all in the commission form of government, you all have to determine how you're going to govern the day-to-day functions of your city. There's 5 of you, the mayor and 4 commissioners. The city has to classify its administrative functions on the basis of departments. And those are defined in ordinance. So you may have a parks department, a police department, a roads department, a utility department, administrative department, ever how many there are. You have to have your administrative functions classified into departments in the commission plan of government. Again, not in the city manager form of government. That is important because in a commission city, you have 2 options for the day-to-day superintendents or functioning and oversight of the city employees. Because you think about it, city employees have 5 bosses in this form of government. And you can only act while you're meeting. So there has to be a way to do that. The easy button on running the day-to-day activities is to establish the office of a city administrator and hiring a city administrator who works for the city commission and reports back to the city commission for them to exercise all that executive and legislative authority. I think for the Nicholasville folks from Nicholasville, I think that's what Nicholasville does or is doing or about to do. For most of Kentucky cities that are organized under the commission plan of government, the first regular meeting gets even more interesting than just appointing the mayor pro tem. You have to designate, if you don't have a city administrator, one commissioner to have superintendent's function over each and every department. And that is a limited liaison type of authority. So when we get together, you may run into somebody in the hallway who introduces themselves as the police commissioner in whatever city. That means that they've been selected to have that superintendent's function, which is a limited oversight liaison type of function over that police department, and they're organized under a commission plan city. That doesn't give them the authority to go out and fire, hire, sign contracts. It really is, if something major comes up, I'd call the commission back together to deal with the issues, but it's a limited role. In the commission form of government, that by far is the most common way that it's done. And remember, in the commission plan, at the end of the day, whether you have a CAO or you have commissioners assigned to various departments, the buck stops with the city commission as a body, all executive and legislative authority. So that means a commission can override any action or provide instruction to the CAO or any individual commissioners with that superintendent's function if it's acting together as a body. Now, the city manager plan of government is different. And what makes a city manager government unique is, guess what? It has a city manager. City managers only exist under the 19 cities that are organized under the city manager plan. And the city manager is a central figure in defining what a city manager form of government is. The duties of the office of city manager, which we'll talk about on the next slide, is specified in both state law and in a required local ordinance that establishes the position. So the responsibilities, the state statutes set out many responsibilities for the city manager, but there may be additional duties for the city manager in your community, depending on your local ordinance. So if you're in one of these forms of government, you may want to pull the ordinance describing the duties of the city manager. So you can get familiar if your city has added additional responsibilities on top of these we'll talk about that are embodied in state law. The ordinance has to establish the qualifications for the office. Now that's going to vary from city to city. Paris is different than Corbin's, and Richmond's is different than Frankfort's, and Ashland's is different than Henderson's. It's all very different what the qualifications are. Some cities require a certain educational level. Some cities require certain experience in the job, but the city gets to decide in that ordinance establishing the qualifications of the office, what they want to do. The bare minimum under state law is that they have experience or knowledge relevant to the office of the city manager. So it's very, very general. Once the city manager is appointed, they're appointed for an indefinite term. So they don't go out every single time there's a new commission or a new mayor, any election. Once they go into the position, they serve indefinitely in that non-elected office of city manager. They have to be put into the position by a majority vote of all the members of the Board of Commissioners. So it takes 3 votes in order to appoint the city manager. And the city manager can only be removed by a majority vote of all commissioners. So it takes 3 votes in order to remove the city manager from his or her office. And that is after you give a special 30-day notice and the right to have a hearing. I've only seen in one case where the city manager elected to have a nice big public hearing on the termination since I've been around now around city government. But you have to have the right to a hearing and special notice and a majority vote of all the members prior to the removal. Now, what does state law? Keep in mind, again, you may in your ordinance have additional authorities assigned, but what does state law say about the office of city manager? First of all, it says that the city manager serves as the chief administrative officer of the city. It doesn't say chief executive officer. It's chief administrative officer of the city. In that capacity, the city manager supervises the day-to-day activities of your employees, prepares a proposed budget for the Board of Commissioners. So this looks a lot like the mayor and the mayor council form of government. So it's the city manager who serves on behalf of the Board of Commissioners, who says, this is what I'm recommending as a budget. The Board of Commissioners can do whatever it wants to do with it, but the mayor prepares that proposed budget. And once the Board of Commissioners approves that budget, It's the city manager ultimately that administers it on behalf of the Board of Commissioners and acts pursuant to the document that's ultimately adopted by the Board of Commissioners. Again, that looks an awful lot like the mayor in the mayor council form of government, preparing it. Yeah, Board of Commissioners adopts it, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners could provide specific instruction on how they want it administered or how they want it prepared. Preparation and submission of year-end reports on finances and administrative activities. Some cities require that more frequently, but at a minimum, state law requires the city manager to submit and prepare end-of-year reports on all finances and administrative activities of the city. State law also requires that the city manager faithfully carry out any executive responsibilities on behalf of the Board of Commissioners that it requests it to do so. What's that mean? Again, the buck stops with the Board of Commissioners. And if the Board of Commissioners provides a directive consistent with state law to the city manager, the city manager is responsible for carrying that out. Making recommendations to the board on personnel matters. This is the city manager doesn't have the authority to hire and fire on his or her own. That ultimately goes to the Board of Commissioners. The manager makes recommendations to do so for hiring and termination. It's the Board of Commissioners that ultimately makes that decision. And this last bullet point is really important because I want to come back around and emphasize this. The city manager is responsible for supervising all the departments and all the city employees. And I can tell you from experience, one of the things that really muddies up the waters in the city manager form of government is where a city commissioner in a city manager form of government decides that he or she has the sole authority to do supervision or order employees around. That is the role of the city manager. And the same answer applies. We asked the council members, how much power do you have as an individual council member? And we said, what? Power of one vote. Same here. As a city commissioner and that city manager plan of government. Yeah, in city commission, you may have superintendent's function, but under the city manager form of government, just to be abundantly clear, you have the power of one vote on the Board of Commissioners. You do not have independent authority to direct employees. You do not have independent authorities to fire anybody. You do not have independent authority whatsoever. Your vote is on the Board of Commissioners. And if the Board of Commissioners votes as a whole on any, not as a whole, meets as a body and votes as a majority on any issue, it can provide any direction that it sees fit to the city manager. And otherwise, the supervision of employment, the recommendations carrying out those executive authority ultimately falls to the city manager on a day-to-day basis. And this just makes that point again. And for both forms of government, we'll use a caution sign again, not the stop sign. If you're going to make personnel changes and as administrations change, you all do make personnel changes. And that's fine. You got to do that. You've been elected for a purpose. Slow down. Be sure you're talking to your city attorney, the league. Know your city's policy. Be aware of your roles, limits, and on your roles and authorities before you take personnel action. Get some guidance because it is a very litigious environment. Are there any questions about this on the forms of government?
Yes, I got a question, Mr. Cheney. That might be the only Northern Kentuckian here tonight, but
They all came to the party last night, Owen.
missed it. Well, I get to hang out with all you, and I'm having a fun time. My question is, I've got a few neighboring cities up here that have city managers. Do you have to be? They're in a council form of government. I have one neighboring city that has a board of commissioners, a city manager, and a mayor. However, I've got two, including our next door neighbor, has a mayor, council, and city manager. It was also to my understanding that their city managers are directly to the mayor, that the mayor appoints those and can fire those. Would that be better served to consider those as city administrators? Is there a difference?
That is completely correct. Newport is the only one in your county that's truly organized under the city manager form of government. So Tom up there in Newport is the city manager. Dayton, Fort Thomas, Wilder, all of those have a city administrator. They may call them a city manager, but in that instance, much like Hopkinsville, I know we got a council member from Hopkinsville. The city administrator you've authorized reports to the mayor in those cities because they're all organized under the mayor council form of government. So they're not true city managers. Newport is the only one in Campbell County that's organized under the city manager form of government.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, this looks like a good time. If there's not any additional questions, this looks like a good time. I'm going to blame this on you all and say you all need a break to go to the restroom, refresh your bourbon or coffee or whatever it is that you're having to drink. We'll take about a 5-minute break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and go on with open meetings, and then you'll be finished with me, and you can hear from Morgan. So come back here in about 5 minutes, and we'll go over open meetings law.
Well, I'm not above it. I'm just sitting back listening right now. I want to make sure I remembered all this.
And this is Alicia Estes from Hickman, Kentucky, checking in. I didn't get to get in earlier.
Hey, Alicia, I'm glad you're here. You are definitely, well, nobody could be further west than you, huh? Anyway.
Ain't that the truth?
We were down there this summer and did the Mississippi River tour up from Wycliffe and all the way down, came down to Hickman and visited down there. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you.
Is break over?
It's about over. We're getting close.
Marie, she's got me on a time schedule here. She said if somebody's in.
Well, we will move on with open meetings laws. And
Maybe
this,
we had one question from Patsy Sullivan in Middlesboro, the councilwoman.
Yes,
She
ma'am.
tried to jump in, but she couldn't get her microphone to work. She had a question: if they have a council member sit in for the mayor, do they still have a vote? Does that individual have a vote as presiding officer?
and the answer to that, Ms. Sullivan, is yes, they do. They don't lose their power. If it's a council member presiding in the mayor's absence, they can continue to vote. All right. If that's it, we'll go on with Open Meetings Act, and I'll try to roll through it reasonably quickly. And let's talk. This is going to apply to everybody. Doesn't matter what form of government. This is universal where this law applies. The easiest thing to do is look at the preamble to the whole act, and it'll tell you that the purpose of the act is that the business of people shall not be conducted in secret. The public has a right to at least view the formation of local policy. Think about this. This is before my time. There wasn't any laws prior to the late 1970s, mid 1970s, that required city and county governments or state government, legislative bodies and committees to meet in public. So the public may or may not know. And then Kentucky came along and adopted what's commonly referred to as sunshine laws. That's why there's a sunshine there. But they originated in Florida, but the sunshine's there from the Supreme Court Justice's statement that sunshine is the greatest disinfectant for government and transparency. So these transparency laws are really important. The purpose of them is to at least allow the people to view and participate in some minor way the formation of local policy. It serves as a check on government. We got much more accountability. We got much more responsibility when you're out operating in the light of day, to where the public has an opportunity to scrutinize and evaluate the work that you've been elected to do. So this is a very important law. It can also sometimes be controversial. The newspapers will keep you in check on this, or your local media, to ensure that you're conducting business in the public in the public's view. So let's talk about what the Open Meetings Act requires and who it applies to. First question, really simple hurdle: who has to comply with Kentucky Open Meetings Law? You all on your city council, your city commission, and we're talking about these as legislative bodies, a governing body, the council, the commission, and the board of commissioners. That's easy, right? You all have to comply with the Kentucky Open Meetings Law. And so, and your urban county council for the folks from Lexington here, all have to comply with the Open Meetings Law. This applies to any public agency in the Commonwealth, fiscal courts and otherwise. What really trips up a lot of cities, though, is the fact that that Open Meetings Law extends to any committee, subcommittee, commission, board, other ad hoc advisory council that's created by the legislative body or the chief executive officer of the city. So you may think, well, let's create a parade committee. Well, that parade committee, even if it's just for a single parade, also has to comply with and follow all of these laws we're getting ready to talk about, because it too is considered a public agency. So the progeny of a city is also a public agency, even if it's temporary and you think it's informal. Those committees and commissions also have to comply with the Kentucky Open Meetings Act. Do we have a question? I see a flashing orange thing on the screen, Morgan.
And that would be a question. Councilwoman Sullivan asked again, what about if they have a meeting and then go into executive session?
Council Member Sullivan, I am going to get you there. Hold tight. It's about 5 slides away. And we'll talk about the executive session. Let's start with the basics, who it applies to, and then what types of meetings are covered. And that is a perfect question. And I promise you I'll answer it in a couple of minutes. First thing I want you to learn there about the Open Meetings Act, though, is what types of meetings are covered. Now, the Kentucky Open Meetings Law defines a meeting as any gathering of 2 or more people. Now, just stop and think about that instead of just thinking I'm saying a bunch of words. What is a gathering of 2 or more people, realistically?
A quorum.
A gathering of 2 or more people is a conversation.
A conspiracy.
A conspiracy.
Yeah, conspiracy.
A gathering of 2 or more people is just basically a conversation. Now, thankfully, Kentucky's Open Meeting Law does not apply to every type of meeting or any gathering of 2 or more people. This is the most important thing for you to remember from the Kentucky Open Meetings Act, this first bullet point on this slide. When does it apply? What types of meetings are covered? And thankfully, the only time that the Open Meetings Law is implicated is when you're having a meeting of a quorum, not just a gathering of 2 or more people, a meeting, a gathering of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business. So there's a few things you need to understand in this definition. First of all, Ms. Brammer, you brought up the idea of a quorum. What is a quorum?
In our council, it would be the mayor, city commission, so a quorum would be three people.
A quorum is the majority of your legislative body. So
Right.
it's 12-member council, 7 is a quorum.
Yeah.
6-member council, 4 is a quorum. It's a majority of the legislative body. In Middlesboro, that's 5 of 9. So it's a meeting of a quorum. So you got to have a quorum where you're taking action. You're voting upon an issue, or ultimately you're making a commitment to vote a certain way on an issue, or you're talking about public business. And public business means you're talking about any topic or subject area over which the city may ultimately have authority to take action at the end of the day. So, if you're talking about certain things, it may not apply. And so it's going to apply unless this exception, you can go into closed session to discuss certain topics. And we're going to talk about those. Rhonda from not Rhonda, Miss Sullivan from Middlesboro. The law also applies to a series of less than quorum meetings. So this is where it wasn't originally under the open meetings law, but people thought they would get smart and say, well, let's have a bunch of mini meetings to avoid having to do all this out in the public. And let's have 3 council members meet. That's not a quorum. That's fine. Send 2 of them to meet with the 4th one and 2 of them to meet with the 5th one, and so on. Conducting a series of less than quorum meetings with the intent of circumventing the requirements of the open meetings law is also a violation of the open meetings law. So you can't split yourselves up. You have to have an intent to circumvent, but that's when it's required. So if we take this basic definition of any meeting of a quorum where actions taken or public business is discussed, what types of things may not be subject to the Open Meetings Act? And I'll start first dealing with quorum. If 3 council members on a 6-member council are together, is that a meeting of a quorum?
No, because you have to have, it would be 4, wouldn't it?
That's correct. So a meeting of a quorum, unless you're doing these mini meetings, is not a violation of the open, is not a violation. So 3 of your council members to get together, 2 commissioners can get together in the commission and city manager form of government. That's not violative.
Mr. Cheney,
Yes.
in the mini meetings, if somebody took it upon themselves to get on their phone or an email and contact what would constitute a quorum about a specific subject of city business, would that fall into it?
Yep. I mean, that's going to be a violation. Anything you do to facilitate a gathering, even if the person's not physically present, and this is a great example to take this into, a joint email, reply all feature on an email can get you into a meeting of a quorum. So if the mayor sends out or the city manager sends out an email to everybody on the council or commission or board of commissioners, and commissioners and council members start hitting reply all, or you FaceTime everybody, or you get on a Facebook posting or Twitter together as a group, and you have a dialogue or a discussion of public business, then you have a violation. So yeah, that could happen, and especially if you have a design or intent to circumvent the requirements of the open meetings law, you have a problem.
So if they one-on-one called until they got enough votes, calling one-on-one, that could fall into it too?
Well, you have
if
to
they talk about the same thing?
You have to have an intent to circumvent the requirements of the open meetings law. You have
Gotcha.
to
Thank you.
possible intent to do that. That provision doesn't keep you from lobbying. You may say, hey, I want this ordinance passed, and I'm going to call everybody. You're not trying to get the vote or the ready-made decision prior to the meeting. In order for somebody to call that a violation, so you can talk with one another one-on-one, but you can't have some scheme devised where you go in groups or less than quorum meetings in order to get it done.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So it's meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business where this applies. So if you're together with a quorum, you can go to a social gathering or holiday party. We get calls around Christmas every year where people are saying, well, we got a holiday party, and 2 council members are going to come from 6 to 7. The other 3 are going to come from 7 to 7:30. You don't have to do that. You can be together as a quorum. You just can't talk about public business when you're together as a quorum. And that's easier said than done. That's a hard thing, because what's the one thing you have in common with your fellow commissioners and council members? That commissioners and council members. That's going to be difficult to avoid talking about subjects over which you have control, discussion of public business. You can all be together as a quorum and talk about Kentucky basketball. You don't, as much as you would like to probably, have influence over the Kentucky basketball team. Guess what? Your council or commission doesn't. It's not a subject area over which they have control. But if you get together and talk about a park situation or an employment matter, those are all matters in which you can. So you could all go out to a restaurant together. You just can't talk about public business. You can come to the City Officials Academy. Middlesboro's demonstrating tonight. You can, even though you're not all in office yet, but if you were, all nine of the council members could be here as long as they're not talking about with each other public business over which they have control. You can come to the convention, City Officials Academy, conferences, general training sessions, all of that wouldn't be subject as long as you're not in a quorum talking about taking action or committing or talking about public business. So in instances where you have a meeting of a quorum where you're going to take action or talk about public business, how do you go about making the meeting open? And this is where the law imposes its most particular requirements about how you comply. Take a drink here, sorry. You have to hold, if you have a meeting of a quorum where you're going to take action or discuss public business, you have to hold the meeting at a time that's convenient to the public. Now, a convenient time for all kinds of different people. Somebody give me a convenient time.
7:30.
1800.
30, 6 o'clock. Some people may say 8 o'clock in the morning because you work third shift. Notice that this provision does not say you have to hold the meeting at the most convenient time for the most amount of people inside of your city. It does not require that. You just can't hold it in an inconvenient time. If you're trying to get smart alecky and say, hey, let's hold it at 10 o'clock p.m. because most of the old people are in bed by 8, we can avoid those crotchety people coming to the meeting. You're violating the spirit of the Kentucky Open Meetings Law. But under the decisions and precedents that's been issued and opinions from the Attorney General's office, pretty much you know you're not safe if you're setting the time between midnight and 6 a.m. I mean, that's just going to be a per se inconvenient time for the public to attend. But if you have an emergency situation that requires you to assemble quickly, that may be the only time that it would justify that. When you set the times of your meetings, you should endeavor to try to set it at a time where the public could readily access the meeting. If your meeting is a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you also have to hold the meeting at a place that's convenient to the public. And that is defined both in terms of geography and the facility in which you're going to conduct the meeting. First of all, in terms of geography, you have to hold the meeting, the rule is that you have to hold the meeting inside the corporate boundaries of your city. Unless, and here's the exception, unless it's necessary to do otherwise. You can probably think of some circumstances to be out that would necessitate going outside of your municipal boundaries. You know, the Open Meetings Law thrives on the idea that you maximize public participation. So if you have a city council chamber that holds 20 people, but you're talking about a controversial issue where 1,000 are interested and you don't have any facility inside your city limits, but you got a high school gymnasium or elementary school cafeteria or church auditorium a mile outside of your boundaries, how are you best going to maximize that public's right to access it? By moving it outside the city limits. That necessitates it. And in Kentucky, you can't be in 2 cities at one time unless you're in Louisville. There's 83 cities up there in Louisville metro government. So, for example, if Richmond and Berea wanted to convene their legislative bodies together in a meeting, you're picking Richmond or Berea. You can't be in Richmond and Berea at the same time. So that would necessitate meeting outside of your geographic boundaries in that instance. You know, this really got defined when the city of Covington, right as soon as I was coming out of law school, decided that they were going to hold a retreat for their board of commissioners, and they were going to come to Lexington. I don't know why you'd come to Lexington for a retreat, but they were coming to Lexington to retreat. And just the term retreat in and of itself ought to raise some eyebrows, right? Who are you retreating from if you're retreating? Who are you running away from? The public.
Constituents.
The public.
The public. So you can't go out on retreats. You can have retreats. You can call them retreats, but you got to comply with the open meetings law if you're going to have them, and you got to have them within your municipal boundaries. You can't take those things offline in terms of complying. And that's where the rule came from. You got to do your municipal boundaries unless there's some necessity. Places convenient also mean accommodating facilities. And when you're looking at facilities, that means you have to provide good acoustics. So people have the right to see and hear, right? Both see and hear the formation of public policies when a public agency is meeting together. So if you have somebody in the back that says they can't hear, you have a duty to remedy that. You have a duty to allow access to all those that want to attend the meeting. So that example on a tornado takes down City Hall, you may have to go somewhere else outside of your boundary or look for a facility that will do the crowd. Some cities remedy that if they have a lot by doing closed circuit television in order to do accommodating facilities. In addition to places that are convenient to the public and times convenient to the public when you got a quorum and you're taking action or discussing public business, you have to take minutes of the meeting. So state law requires not only your council, commission, or board of commissioners to take those minutes, but also this applies to all those committees, permanent or temporary, to record the minutes. Sometimes your minutes may say, we convened, we adjourned. This is where your city clerks come in handy. This is their area of expertise. And every one of your cities have a city clerk. They take the minutes, they put narrative to it. And at a minimum, state law requires that you record any action taken and the votes of each and every individual that's present on the council or on the public agency board. So every time you meet as a quorum, any public agency where you're taking action or discussing public business, you have to have minutes. You can't place any conditions on attendance. And this is really important too. You can't just say, hey, we're only going to let our city residents attend, or you have to own a business in order to attend, or you have to be a Democrat or a Republican, or we're just going to have ladies' night at the Board of Commission meeting tonight. No conditions, no residency restrictions, no conditions, absolutely none on the right to be able to attend the right to be able to attend meetings of a public agency. Now that is very different. If you remember, the Open Meetings Act only vests the right to be able to see and hear, correct? Not to speak before the legislative body. You can place any condition. The legislative body, the council, commission, board of commissioners, can do any condition that it wants to, as long as it's not illegal or unconstitutional, on the right to be able to speak before the council. You can say you got to sign up 24 hours in advance. You got to tell us you got to be a resident if you're going to take up the time. You got to be a voter, business located in the city. You can place any condition you want to on the right to be able to address the legislative body, but you can't place any conditions on attendance. And
Mr. Cheney.
The last bullet point, let me get this and I'll summarize this side up and take your question. The last thing, if your meeting is a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, is the right of the press to be able to cover the meeting. It's pretty much an unqualified right. It says in the statute that as long as it wouldn't be disruptive to the process. Look, we've got small cell phones now. The press has a right to attend and a right to broadcast from the meeting, whether that's written or radio or otherwise. The press pretty much has a unilateral, unqualified right to be able to cover. So just keep in mind, quorum, if you're as a quorum, you're taking action or discussing public business, you got to hold it at a convenient time, convenient place, you got to take minutes, no conditions on attendance, and the press has a right to cover it. Yes, sir.
The restrictions you mentioned on who might be able to be heard before the legislative body, is that something we need to have, they would need to have in their local ordinances, or is that something they just can bring up that meeting because they saw somebody walk in the door they don't like?
No, you would need to, well, ultimately, if you don't have any rules, the presiding officer may not call upon the person. But if you want to set rules and requirements, you would, the council or commission or board of commissioners would need to adopt that. Some have adopted it by ordinance. I wouldn't do that. I would use a municipal order, which governs internal operations, as a tool that would set the requirements for addressing the legislative body. Municipal order.
Thank you. And then if I could ask one more, I had a question about COVID and given the public access to actually seeing meetings. Would that kind of tell us now that we need to try to find a way to live stream meetings for people that aren't safe to attend?
That's a great transition over. You all are all probably going to go in, or most of you are going to go in a situation where we are governed by some different laws right now that we got put in statute at the end of not statute, that got enacted into law at the end of last session because of the difficulties of meeting in the middle of a pandemic. Right now, a lot of your cities are using Zooms and GoToMeetings and Teams and all these other platforms. And under Kentucky law right now, you're permitted to do that, and not, if you were doing a virtual meeting, anybody was participating virtually at all in a council or commission or board of commissioners meeting, there's certain steps you have to follow, and you have to provide a place for the public to go and attend to watch it. We had the General Assembly suspend that requirement during the pendency of the governor's executive order. So you do have to notice up, you're doing it virtually. You have to do that in conformance with the open meetings law, but you don't have to provide the physical location. But you do have to, in the notice, if you're transitioned to a virtual meeting, provide the means by which the public could see and hear everybody, unless there's one exception we put in there. Some of our cities don't have the technological capacity, the bandwidth or coverage. You'd be surprised how many cities in Kentucky don't have broadband. You know, we all talk about rural broadband access. We have several cities in Kentucky that have 7% coverage inside their municipal boundaries with broadband, and they don't have the technological capacity to do a virtual meeting like this. And so in that instance, only in that instance, they could do it by cell phone. But you've got to provide the means of access to the public and noticing up the fact that you're doing virtual meetings. And that was written into. That's a good.
Could I ask you one more, and I apologize. I just had a list made before tonight.
Go right ahead.
So say on your commission, you have a sitting member that has a disability, and I'll just be frank, has a kidney failure, and the rest of the commissioners aren't exercising safety precautions at those meetings. Is it up to the commission to allow that person to attend virtually, or do they have a right to say, I want to attend virtually?
Well, in order for it to be made a virtual meeting, if you're going to have one person attending virtually, you have to follow that requirement to provide the notice where the access could be seen virtually,
Gotcha.
where the public could access. So if the city has migrated off and said, we're meeting in person and we're not providing access, and the commission doesn't, and that ultimately is up to the commissioner, board of commissioners, or the council about how it's conducted its meeting. If the council as a whole hasn't made that decision and says we're all meeting in person, and you got one person that says no and 5 that say yes, you know, if it's not properly noticed, the individual wouldn't have an avenue to attend in another manner.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just
questions.
how about we do this, Morgan? How about we get through open meetings and then catch it at the end? Because I don't want to leave you without any time, and we're getting really close to the point where you won't get to talk about your stuff. And not that I don't want to answer. Let's try to, maybe we'll just catch them all at the end if that's okay. After your presentation too, because we only have 45 minutes left or so. So your meeting is a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business. Convenient time, convenient place. You take minutes, no conditions on attendance. Now, if you have a regular meeting, every one of your cities has an ordinance on the book that sets up the time and place that you're fixed to have at least once a month meetings. Every one of you have an ordinance, and they say something like the regular meeting of the city council will be at 7:00 p.m. on the first Monday of the month at City Hall. That's in ordinance. That's set up. That's established as your regular meeting time. And every one of your cities have one. You can change the ordinance. Sometimes that gets changed and examined when new commissioners, new council members come in to try to find a convenient time in order to be able to do it. That's changed. Any deviation, any meeting that you hold that's not at 7:00 on the first Monday of the month at City Hall, if you change the date, the time, the location, you have to treat it as a regular meeting. That schedule of regular meetings has to be made readily available to the public at any time. Of course, you have a public, you could have enacted that regular meeting ordinances 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but the schedule has to be made readily available to the public of the regular meetings. And then again, any deviation from becomes a special meeting. And how do you do special meetings? Special meetings would be called by the mayor or by a majority of the legislative body. We covered that in previous slides. You can do the call. The mayor, as the presiding officer, can call the special meeting, or a majority of the legislative body can take a vote on it. But in order to have the special meeting, you have to provide written notice to all the members of the council, all the members of the commission, board of commissioners, and the mayor. You have to provide a written notice to them of the special meeting, and you have to give it to media who have requested to receive notices of special meetings. You don't have to guess which media might be interested in knowing about your special meeting. Your local newspaper is going to, but you know what? You know, the Pikeville newspaper, Alicia, is not going to care when the Hickman council meets or commission meets. You can bet that they're not going to file a request to know that. But the Paducah Sun might, and your local newspaper might have on file. So the written notice has to be sent to all the legislative body members and mayor and the media who have on file a request with the city or the public agency to receive notices of special meetings. And it has to be sent 24 hours in advance of the special meeting by fax, mail, U.S. Postal Service, or personal delivery. And we know by now most of us don't have fax machines in our homes or access to them or don't use them. The U.S. Postal Service, not a complete guarantee that it's going to get there on time 24 hours in advance. Personal delivery can be costly. And so most cities are going to want to use email in order to do that. But in order to use email to provide the 24-hour notice of the special meeting, the member, the legislative body member, the mayor, or the media that have on file a request to receive notification has to provide their consent in writing along with the email address in order to be able to use that. If you have a stubborn council member, I always say every city has at least one jerk, and sometimes they get elected. And but if you have one council member that says nope, or one commissioner, I'm not going to receive it, you got to deliver the special meeting notice in the other way. That's something we're looking at correcting in the next legislative session. But right now, the law is email can only be used if you provided that consent in writing. So your city clerk, if she hasn't or he has not already, they're probably going to be sending you a form to say, give us your consent and tell us your preferred email address to receive that special meeting notices. And I'll tell you, I know there's some clerks on here. Lisa, Stephanie Settles is on from Paris, and maybe some other clerks as well. That makes life a lot easier and smoother functioning if you listen to them when they ask to get your consent to receive special meeting notices via an email. In addition, that notice has to be posted 24 hours in advance at the city hall and the place where the meeting is going to be held. That's usually one and the same place if the special meeting is going to be at city hall. But if you use one of those examples, like you got to go down to the high school gymnasium, it's got to be posted at both city hall and the place where the meeting is going to be held. In that example, the high school gymnasium, 24 hours in advance. Now, what has to be in that notice that you post? The written notice for special meetings has to include some pretty obvious things: the date, the time, the place of the meeting, all have to be in there. And then, very importantly, for special meeting purposes, it has to also include an agenda. You notice I didn't mention anything about regular meetings having to have an agenda. Now, it would not be wise to go into a regular meeting without an agenda. And every city I know has an agenda for regular meetings, but state law doesn't require it for regular meetings. It does for special meetings. So your written notice, date, time, place, and the agenda. And the reason the agenda is important is because you have to identify in that agenda the subject matters at which you're going to have discussion over at the special meeting. And you can't talk about anything else other than the subjects that are listed on that agenda when you're at the special meeting. And you can't be cute and vague about it, like we're going to talk about city business. You have to, on that agenda, identify the items with reasonable particularity so that the public has a general sense, at least a little better than a general sense, of what topic areas you're going to cover on that special meeting agenda. Now, we got to special meetings, regular meetings, meetings of a quorum where you're taking action, discussing public business have to be convenient time, convenient place, minutes have to be taken, no conditions on attendance. The press has the right to attend. Any deviation from your regular meeting schedule becomes a special meeting with all those 24-hour notice and posting requirements. Now we come to the exception. And Ms. Sullivan, I believe this will address your issue, which is there are times that it's warranted for the public agency to go outside the scope of having an open meeting where people can see and hear under that right. And these are the four right now we'll cover. The Academy will go into more detail. But these are the four topic areas that you can go into a closed session for to discuss public business. And if you look at them, first of all, deliberations on the acquisition or sale of property. It should say real property. So if you're talking about buying or selling real property, you can go into closed session. Why? Because an open discussion could affect the value. Discussions on proposed or pending litigation. So if you're talking about a lawsuit or settlement of a lawsuit or a discussion with your attorney about a litigation matter, you can go into closed session to have that discussion under the open meetings law. Why? Because if you had an open discussion with your city attorney, or you said, hey, we're going to settle the lawsuit for this amount, it's going to jeopardize your positioning related to litigation, and it's going to breach the attorney-client privilege that you have with your attorney. You'll see here that these are designed to protect the taxpayer, ultimately, not to protect you all as elected city officials. You're talking about protecting the city's resources when we allow going into those closed sessions. The third most common one, it gets frustrating sometimes because a lot of people will say this is a personnel exemption. That's a misnomer. You can't just go into closed session to talk about general personnel matters. It ultimately has to be a discussion which could lead to the appointment, discipline, or termination of a particular individual. In those circumstances, you can go into closed session. It has to be about the appointment, discipline, or termination of a particular individual to go into closed session under the Open Meetings Act. And then this really highlights the fact that this is designed to protect the public, benefit of the public, not you as elected city officials. Discussions with the business entity itself, if an open dialogue would jeopardize the siting, the retention, the expansion, or upgrading of that business. If you think an open meeting with that business is going to result in the loss of jobs or the loss of opportunity for jobs and economic development in your community, it is in the public's interest for you to be able to have that. And businesses, when they're looking at siding, retention, expansion, all of those things have a lot of privacy around that. And so the fourth most common is that. Now, there is a misconception about the Open Meetings Act, is that the mayor could just bang the gavel and say, let's go into closed session. You can't just call up the council and say, hey, we need to talk about the litigation. Let's get together over on my porch or in my kitchen. You have to start out in a properly noticed open session. The mayor can't take the commission, board of commissioners, the council into closed session unilaterally. In order to go into closed session, it has to be by motion and vote. And the motion and vote has to generally state the nature of the business, the reason for going into closed session, and the specific provision of the Kentucky Revised Statutes which authorize the closed session. That has to be motioned, seconded, voted, and carried by a majority of a quorum in order to go into closed session. So it sounds something like this. Madam Mayor, I move that we go into closed session under KRS 61-810-1C in order to discuss the lawsuit against the city because an open discussion could jeopardize our ability to settle that pending lawsuit. Motion, second, and carried. You have to put, right now under Kentucky law, you have to cite the statute. And this is where your city attorney, your city clerk, and others, because you're probably not going to memorize all of the provisions of KRS 61-810-1 A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and J to know which one to cite. So this is where you're going to rely on them, but that has to happen. Once you get into closed session, if it carries, you can't talk about anything else other than the topics that was publicly announced and going into closed session. I chuckle about that because now I've been in enough closed sessions with cities that I also realize almost every one I've been in starts out with, before the topic gets going, well, now that we're back here, let's just talk about you can't do that. You can't talk about anything other than what was announced publicly. And then lastly, in the procedure for conducting closed sessions, you can't take any final action in the closed session other than that, which you can't take any final action at all. You got to come back out into open session to take final action. It's shielding the discussion. Final action has to be out in open session. So that's the thumbnail sketch of the Kentucky Open Meetings Law. Just remember, meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you have to make them open. To go into closed session, you have to follow this procedure if it meets the criteria. There are more than 4. We'll kind of cover those at the academy, or you'll learn about them as you go along. But in the interest of time, and I hate not answering questions contemporaneous with as they're coming up, but in order for Morgan to cover what I think is very important material, such as budgeting, procurement, ethics, somewhat the open records law, then I need to shut up. And we will hang around here for those of you that do want to answer questions. When Morgan finishes up, we'll take all kinds of questions from you and stay on here all night if you want to. But right now I'm going to introduce our Director of Municipal Law, Morgan Sprague Patterson, to cover those other topic areas. Thank you all for listening to me, and we'll be back at the end.
Okay, y'all, good evening. I'm Morgan Patterson, I'm Director of Municipal Law, and I am going to try to share my screen with you. All right, there we go. So tonight we are going to talk now about open records. Let's see, budget, procurement, a little bit about ethics, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. The Open Records Act. This is everybody's favorite statute. It's very exciting. It's about paper, records, all that good stuff. Everything the city does, every record, every document, every reporting, anything. And what you'll notice is that the Open Records Act is very similar in its aspirations and its goals as to open meetings. It starts out with the same expression of legislative intent, which is that all public records, all records of the people's business should be open and available to the public for public inspection. Very similar to the Open Meetings Act. A lot of the exceptions are similar. So what is a public agency? It's kind of what we want to start out with. It may seem pretty simple, but there are a few little kind of idiosyncrasies that you might want to be aware of. One issue is that each individual council member, each individual elected official is identified as their own little public agency in the Open Records Act. That means that any of the records that you produce individually as an individual council member, individual commissioner, individual mayor, those are yours and you're responsible for producing them. So theoretically, somebody could submit an open records request to you for your records. Now, don't panic. Your clerk and other people in the city are not going to leave you high and dry to handle all of your own stuff. You're still going to have the assistance of the city, but it's important to note that ultimately, as an elected official, those are your records. So the other thing, boards and commissions in the city, Planning and Zoning, Tourism Commission, any commission created by executive or legislative action, they're also covered by the act. And that includes any state or local agency that receives at least 25% of its income from cities or from the state. So what are public records? At one time, public records were easy to identify, usually looks like a sheet of paper, but then comes along our handy dandy iPhones, right? And there was a question earlier in the Open Meetings Act about what happens when you're on Facebook? What happens when you're on social media? Can you accidentally convene a quorum if you're discussing city business? Absolutely. You can also create a public record that you will be held responsible for producing if it's requested under the Open Records Act. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into social media. If you come to the City Officials Academy, note, shameless plug, we will talk more about social media and the implications when an elected official is on there. However, one thing to pay attention to is that if you are on social media and you've identified yourself as an elected official, what you're creating may be a public record. In fact, it generally is. Good news, most of the online platforms that are commonly used, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and the like, they are going to have archives of your records. So you'll be in pretty good shape there. But it's still important to know that these are documents that can be produced and have to be produced under open records. So who can request a public record? Who can request access? It can be anybody. It can be your city jerk that JD was talking about earlier. It can be someone who's filed suit against the city. That's a question we frequently get. So-and-so has filed a lawsuit, or they're getting ready to, we know they're getting ready to, and now we have an open records request. Do we have to respond? That answer is yes, you have to respond. Anyone can request a public record unless there's an exception. What about council members? So when earlier JD mentioned that when you're a council member, you're only empowered as a council member when you are seated in a council meeting as a member of that body. When you leave, you're John Q. Public again, right? Just like the rest of us. Well, elected officials, while you should have access to public records that you need for official purposes, as an individual, you may be asked to file an open records request. Okay? As a body, if the council's meeting and they want to inspect records for various reasons, the body can request them, and those would be produced in your capacity as a city council, not in your capacity as an individual. Okay, procedural requirements. Who is the boss over Open Records Act, over open records in the city? That is the city clerk. That is by statute. It cannot be amended. It cannot be changed. One of the common things that we see with cities is there's so many records in police departments that a lot of PDs will have a police clerk. and the police clerk generally handles the open records for the police department. However, know that the city clerk is ultimately responsible as the open records custodian by statute. So what we've recommended, just to kind of clarify roles, is that in some instances, the commission, or in a mayor council form of government, the mayor can sign an executive order just kind of saying, hey, the police clerk is going to be the open records custodian for these records. As you know from JD's presentation, you cannot change state statute, cannot amend it by executive order, but that does clarify some roles and delegate a little bit just to help out the city clerk. It still needs to be clear to anyone that the city clerk is responsible. State law and city regulations govern the request, the response, and appellate procedure. What that means is your city, every single one of y'all, have an open records policy. You're required by state law to have an open records policy, and with the request, you're going to include how people can make that, with that policy, you'll include the ways in which the open records request is submitted and accepted by the city. That's generally under statute. The options are by hand delivery, US mail, facsimile still, and by email. The city is not required to accept an open records request by email. However, if you don't say in your policy the ways in which the city will accept them, then the Attorney General issued an opinion in the beginning of the year stating that if you're silent to whether the methods for submission, then the city has to accept them by email. So our recommendation is just lay out, we'll accept them by US mail, by facsimile, what have you. And then the response. So cities can have a form for a request, but you can't make people submit it on the form. It just helps them, with providing the information so that the city can find the records they're looking for. The city has 3 days by state law, 3 business days to comply with the request. Under Senate Bill 150, during the pandemic, the state legislature extended that to 10 calendar days, which has given our cities an opportunity to breathe a little bit when they get an open records request. And the appellate procedure is all appeals for any open records denial or what have you. They go either to the Attorney General in Frankfort or to the circuit court in the county where the city's located. So, exceptions. I'm going to just go over 3 exceptions really quickly. There are about 14 to 16 in the actual Open Records Act, so we're not going to go over all of those. But just know that we have certain personal information is accepted. For example, my birth date, my social security number. If someone were to request my personnel file when I was in state government, they can't have my social security number and my birth date. Now, skipping on down to redactions, that doesn't mean that you can say, hey, you can't have this personnel file because her birthday and social security number is in there. Instead, they have to be redacted, which means marked out, copied, and given to somebody. Preliminary documents, that is another exception. The primary one that you'll see are meeting minutes. So if I'm a council member and we have a meeting tonight and the minutes are properly written down by the clerk, which your city clerk will do, then someone turns around and files an open records request for those very minutes tomorrow, then those are preliminary documents because they've not yet been approved by the legislative body. Now, the legislative body only has 1 meeting in which to approve those minutes, or they are automatically final. And the reason for that, as you can imagine, is because before that was in place, people tried to do an end run around producing minutes by just saying, we'll never approve them. That way they'll be preliminary forever. That doesn't work. And then the final one that we're going to talk about are ongoing law enforcement actions. And this doesn't mean that any case that's been open for 20 years and not solved is accepted from open records. It simply means that if there is ongoing law enforcement or prosecution and releasing the documents or releasing the records would jeopardize either the investigation or the prosecution of the case, then if the city can show that it would be harmful, you can hold those records are accepted from production. Okay, so there's a showing of harm. A lot of times in cities, what we'll say is, for example, with 911 calls, if that contains information that the police department wants to hold back, then we're going to need an affidavit from the chief or the investigating officer, or that kind of explains that the harm would be caused by releasing the documents. Same thing with prosecution. If there's an ongoing prosecution, then call your prosecutor. 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you a letter that says, we can't do this. We're in the middle of prosecuting the case. So, attention mayors, pop up. You must distribute information on open meetings and open records to all newly elected and appointed officials within 60 days of the start of their term or appointment. There's a link here. So that means that effective in January, you're going to have 60 days in which to provide all the information on the AG's website, the publications, your duty under the law to your elected officials. They're going to do a certification, and you have 60 days to do that. It's important to know that if, let's say, everybody in your city retires and you've got to appoint your city clerk, your police chief, and you do that on June 1, you have 60 days from the date in which they are appointed. Okay, so you appoint them on June 1, you got 60 days to provide them with that information as well. We're going to send you a reminder in January to make sure that you provide this information to all your elected officials. We're not going to know if you appoint a new police chief or city clerk or fire chief on June 1. So just keep this in mind. And if you have any questions, you can always call us. Ordinances. An ordinance is the law of the city, right? It's the law that the city legislative body establishes so that everyone can follow the same rules, right? It's how we want our city to operate. It's what we want our city to look like. One thing that I say to people, especially when we talk about code enforcement, is I love to be kind of a live free or die kind of person. I like to think of myself that way. In reality, I live in a city because I really like flush toilets. I like electricity. I like the infrastructure. So if I'm going to live here, I agree to comply with certain things, and that would be the city ordinances in the city of Lexington. It's a local law. It's enforceable by the authority of the state. The state delegated the authority to enact these ordinances in your city. Okay, it's used to regulate conduct, appropriate revenue, so your budget is going to be passed in an ordinance, establish compensation, your pay and classification plan, annex territory, and when specifically required by state statute. So, for example, if you guys are a wet city, you're going to have some alcohol beverage control ordinances, right? Okay. There's a specific enactment procedure for ordinances. It has to be introduced by a member of the legislative body. So in a mayor council form of government, the mayor gets a member of the legislative body to sponsor any legislation the mayor would like to see. It can't be introduced by the city clerk, can't be introduced by the city attorney. A member of the legislative body has to. So in a commission form of government or in a city manager form of government, the mayor can absolutely introduce legislation because the mayor is a member of the Board of Commissioners. Has to be in writing, and it can only relate to one subject as stated in its title. Going back to JD's example, City of Lexington, they're not going to pass a leash ordinance, which I always have my dog on a leash, I'll just tell you, but they're not going to pass a leash ordinance and then bury in there somewhere a change to the speed limit outside of my house. Okay, you can't do that. And it has to contain an enacting clause, so it's got to start out with saying, be it ordained by the city of, stamping ground that, Morgan Patterson's road is going to be 40 miles an hour. It's actually 25, but hey, has to follow the precise enactment procedures. Okay, 2 readings on 2 separate days, unless it's an emergency. And don't get all excited about the emergency. When you're talking about emergencies, when it comes to both meetings and kind of going around the ordinance process and the 2 readings, you're talking about a legitimate emergency. You're talking about an ice storm, a flood, or one common emergency is, hey, my pump station went out and suddenly we have 10 people, we have 100 people without water. That's a legitimate emergency. It's not, as I like to say, there's an F-250 down at the Buy Here, Pay Here lot, and our snowplow will fit on the front of it, so we need to go get it. That's not an emergency, okay? Has to be 2 readings on 2 separate days, so we can have a reading, our first reading today, our second reading tomorrow. The first reading doesn't require a vote. A lot of cities do that, just out of habit, tradition, what have you, but it's not mandatory. Sometimes it's strategic. You may be trying to take the temperature of the rest of the legislative body to see if your proposal is going to pass, but it's not required. The vote has to occur on the second reading, and then it is not final after passage until it is published. Has to be approved by majority of the quorum. So we're talking earlier about a 6-member legislative body. If it's 6, then a quorum is 4, right? So if you only have 4 people there, you need 3 people to pass it, okay? A majority of the quorum.
Morgan, do you want questions now, or do you want to hold on till the end?
Let's hold them until the end, and then JD and I'll answer them all at once.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, public purpose spending. This is an important section. The Kentucky Constitution requires that taxes shall be levied for public purposes only. It's Section 171 of the Kentucky Constitution. So this doesn't mean that it can't ever benefit an individual or a specific business. What it means is that it's a balance. The public expenditure has to be primarily or more for the public benefit than for an individual benefit. A good example of this is economic development. Your city may want to sell a piece of property that the city owns for below market value to attract a business or to keep a business in your community. That sounds initially like it's primarily benefiting the business because they're getting a piece of property at cost, below cost. However, for economic development purposes, if that business is going to bring in 10 jobs, 100 jobs, or what have you, then you're going to be able to justify this by saying, this is economic development. I have more jobs for my citizens. I've now expanded my tax base. Good for the public, good for my people. So that little bit of money that you may have lost in selling that property at cost actually ends up a bigger benefit for the citizens as a whole. So it's important to look at the intent of whether private persons are incidentally benefited or simply if the public as a whole is the primary beneficiary. So pop quiz, which law applies to your city? We have 2, general bidding statute and 424-260 or the local model procurement code. I will tell you that in general, I think the only city that I saw, which is the local model procurement code city, was Ashland. We may have more on here. We have a lot of people on here. And in general, what that means is just that they have a little bit more structure. 424-260 gives cities a little more latitude with their bidding processes, including you don't have to accept the lowest bid, right? You don't have to open bids in public. Some cities may have adopted that, but in general, the general bidding statute is just a little more flexible. Generally, all cities are required to advertise and solicit bids for purchases in excess of $30,000. You might want to check your ordinance. A lot of cities have this in their statute or in their ordinances. They cap it at 20,000. That's the old cap. So a couple of years ago, that was raised to 30,000. And just double check your ordinance. Our recommendation is to include in your ordinance that the cap is the maximum allowed by state law, some language to that extent. Both laws have exceptions for professional services and emergency situations. Don't forget, emergency situations means a real emergency. The exception for professional services are services like an architect, an engineer. It does include banking services and insurance services. Now, Lexington people, you guys still bid banking services. You just do it on a 5-year rotation, and that's in ordinance. Some other cities may have similar ordinances. That was really the first one I was familiar with. And regardless of whether you're bidding because your purchase is going to be over $30,000 or for any expenditure you have at all, it's important to realize how the annual budget is going to dictate this process. Cities are not like the federal government. In our statutes, we're required to have a balanced budget, okay? And cities operate on a July 1 to July 30th fiscal year. In the mayor-council form of government, the mayor presents the budget, and the statutes say that the budget and a budget message should be delivered 30 days prior to when the budget ordinance should be enacted. In the city manager form of government, that is presented by the city manager. The budget cannot have expenditures in excess of revenues. So what this means is that you're gonna know what your revenues are. Some of it may be revenue projections, and then you have to base that budget based upon those revenue projections. You can't say, well, we think we're gonna get a big windfall in December, so we're gonna go ahead and roll the dice and go ahead and spend this money. That's not how that works. If you get a windfall in December, then you can go ahead and amend your budget ordinance to reflect any expenditures you want to make from that windfall. The proposed budget is presented to the legislative body and adopted by ordinance. Again, the legislative body has to pass it by ordinance. So with the budgeting process, remember, city funds have to be spent only in accordance with the budget ordinance. So if I'm the mayor and I'm in a mayor council form of government and I've got my budget, and I've got you as the legislative body, you have allocated a certain amount for police, a certain amount for fire, and then a certain amount for general administration. If I'm running low in one pot, I can't just run over here and take from another one. Not if your budget has set that allocation out. I have to spend everything in accordance with the budget. And if I need more money in my administration, I'm going to come back to the city and ask y'all to move it around. The budget administration is the responsibility of the city's executive authority. So that's going to be the mayor and the mayor council form of government. In the city commission form of government, that's going to be everybody. All your board of commissioners. In a city manager form of government, that's going to be the manager, city manager. So once the budget's established, the mayor and the mayor council form of government has a lot of latitude. Failure to comply with the budget ordinance can have big consequences. The city auditor can come, or not the city auditor, the state auditor may end up coming, looking at the books, and you'll get a big nasty finding, or it could be bad enough that there could be willful misconduct. Somebody could be removed. There could be significant issues, even up to and including criminal charges, okay? One of the more common would be to have certain appropriations walked back by the court. And I don't want to say common. I should say civil consequences. So let's talk about ethics. Every city on here, every city is required to have an ethics ordinance. This has to include, by statute, standards of conduct, financial disclosure statements, has to explain that those are required for officials and candidates. So you've probably already had yours filed. A nepotism policy, as we say, this could say, we love nepotism, right? No cities says that, but it just has to have a policy. And the reason the General Assembly wasn't specific about that or severely limiting about what the policy has to be is there may be some cities where if you're small enough, you're going to be related to a lot of people in that city. And you could end up with a new election and having to fire half your city employees. Nobody wants that. So we always encourage cities to draft your nepotism policy and make sure that it's what your city needs. We say that about every policy. Has to have the designation of an enforcement body or an officer. So that can be an ethics commission or an ethics officer. If you're in a smaller city, we're going to recommend you appoint or designate an ethics officer because you may not get enough people to serve on a full committee. And that the ethics ordinances may specify that it applies to appointed officials and employees, and we recommend generally that it does. So another important kind of factor when you're considering ethics are contracting provisions. There is a prohibition against city contracting with any elected official or appointed official or employee. Now, remember, this includes your boards and commissions, your planning and zoning board, board of adjustments, any of your commissioners, and it also includes oral or written contracts. So if I'm a chairman of one of your boards and I'm the only landscaping business in town, and you want to hire me to take care of City Hall, and you're saying, well, we don't need a contract, why don't you just come mow on a given day? Well, that has to go before the legislative body. It's not a horrible process. It just means that the legislative body, at the next meeting of the legislative body, I've got to come in and say, the city wants me to mow. I have a personal interest. I'm also on such and such board. And the legislative body has to determine that it is in the public's best interest to award the contracts to someone with that relationship with the city, with an employee or an appointed official, an elected official, what have you. If not, that's a Class A misdemeanor. So if that's an employee, they could lose their job or unfortunately end up with a Class A misdemeanor, right? To sum up, know the roles and limitations on powers and authorities in your form of government. Avoid costly litigation, JD's caution signs, by conferring with informed attorneys on personnel changes. Call us. Talk to your city attorney first, then call us. Have your city attorney call us. We're happy to help. Meetings and public records have to be open and accessible to the public with certain limitations. Public funds have to be spent for public purposes. And remember, your city operates on a fiscal year from July 1 to June 30th, and funds expended have to conform to the adopted budget ordinance, and be familiar with your city's ethics ordinances. And finally, come to our City Officials Academy. We don't go through things as quickly there. We'll have more time to spend with you, and you will get an opportunity to purchase our City Officials Legal Handbook, the 2021 version. Since JD didn't show it, I get to this time. And you will get first bite at the apple.
Got it too.
It's our Bible. So that's all. I appreciate it. And now we can take whatever questions. JD, I can tell you the questions that I wrote down from the list.
That'd be good. Let's exit the screen share. There you go. All right. So what questions we got? And we'll if you need to get off the call, we understand that. We just want to be sure we provide everybody the opportunity to get their questions answered. If we don't, you don't want to answer them on here, then you're welcome to email us or call us. We're going to send the slides in the program to all of you all by email if that hadn't already been done. So you'll get a copy of the slides as well. Want to email me or Morgan? My email is easy to remember. It's jd@klc.org. Morgan's is mpatterson@klc.org. But y'all call and let us know if you want to ask questions at any point. But let's answer what you got. What do y'all have? And we'll stay here till everybody's happy.
Mike Cash in Moorhead. I have a question about virtual meetings. Are they considered special?
They're not considered special. If they're a regular meeting, if it's in accordance with the time in your regular meeting ordinance. However, under the temporary law we got in effect, you have to comply with the notice requirements for special meetings in terms of providing that access point, whether it's Facebook Live, whether it's allowing people to log directly onto Zoom or whatever else. So you have to still notice it up like it was a special meeting, or not the 24-hour rule, but the but notice it so the public, yes, a 24-hour rule too. Notice it up so the public has access to it. They're not special. It means you can talk about anything you want to, but you still have to notice it like it is to provide notification of how to access it.
Thank you.
No problem.
One of the questions that we had was from Commissioner Gibson in Paris. She said they have a 9 a.m. commission, or they have 9 a.m. commission meetings. But when they did a survey, they found that a lot of the public wanted evening meetings, and she wanted to know if evening meetings can occur and if it's enough that the public is interested in having them.
Absolutely. That's not going to be an inconvenient. Did I hear all that question right, Morgan?
Well, I think she was wondering, how do you change it from 9 a.m. to the evening? And is the 9 a.m. meeting an inconvenience? I don't think
9 a.m. is not going to be an inconvenient time. You can change it. You got to get enough of your fellow legislative body members to go along with you to amend the ordinance to make the change. But the council, the commission, the board of commissioners can change that regular meeting schedule simply by amending that ordinance, which means everybody's got to be in agreement, but you can modify the ordinance. That it?
Could I ask you one more question?
Yeah, there's no limit.
I promise I'll ask just as many the thing in January. So if an ordinance is brought, and the basic backstory in the ordinance was, our attorney was told to look into Versailles because they had a similar abandoned property ordinance, and he brought it back to a meeting, said, here's a draft of a proposed ordinance for you all to look at. They did a first reading, second reading, 2 meetings later, and question was brought up. It was never officially presented by somebody on the commission. The attorney just came and put it on the table and said, here, y'all can talk about it. Did a summary reading, and they said, well, we had asked him to bring it months ago and he brought it. And I'm like, does that fit the law that says that to be presented by a legislator?
Yeah, the introduction sometimes is a little looser. As long as somebody's made the motion to read it, somebody makes that initial motion, it will be considered introduced by the legislative body member. The mayor or somebody could lay any ordinance down they want to, but if the commission or council sits back and says, hey, we're not doing anything with it, same for the city manager, that's fine. But if somebody on that council or commission makes a motion to get it read for the first time and gets it moving, then that would be considered a presentation by the legislative body member. Some cities specify who it's introduced by. It'll say in the minutes, introduced by council member such and such, co-sponsored even, and allow co-sponsorships or co-introductions. Most cities are a little less formal than that, but that would comply.
Thank you. And thank you all for the good training tonight.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Y'all.
I have one quick question, please. Dan Hayes.
Yes, sir.
In the budgeting process, if we go overspend in an area in our budget, how fast do we need to redo the ordinance to keep that budget in balance?
Morgan, you presented on this topic. Let's see if we agree.
So what the statute requires is that you don't overspend. So if you're approaching the end of one fund and you know you're going to go over, you need to amend. In reality, what frequently happens is that you'll end up overspending in a fund and you will amend the ordinance after the fact. So I've not seen a city that has been significantly penalized or penalized at all for doing it shortly after the fact. I've seen some audits that have commented that they wait too long, but that's where I fall, JD. What about you?
I agree. Good job.
So we can't wait until near the end of the fiscal year to do it.
That's the worst case scenario. Some cities do that. It's that's generally going to result in an audit finding, a negative audit finding.
Those proclamations want to follow us.
Hey, JD or Morgan? It's Les.
Hey, Mayor.
Hey,
Hey, I
Mayor.
have a question here. Both of my new council members were on, and they obviously watched the the sections on the open records and open meetings. Does that make them considered as being notified about that, or are we still gonna have to notify them after the first year?
You're still gonna have to notify them after the first of the year, Mayor, but I'm gonna send you everything. I'll
Okay,
send you absolutely everything, and you just gotta send that to them, and then your city clerk will make sure they sign the certification. You'll be good.
Yeah. all right, we've done that every year, but I was just wondering if this would count. Thank you. I'm sorry.
And just so you're curious, even though Les does get special treatment as Mayor of Prestonsburg, we'll send that to all mayors and clerks so that way they can help get that information out, just to remind them. Mostly the clerks end up on top of that for the most part, but we'll send that out to everybody so everybody will be compliant. Okay, well, I'm gonna get back across the river to Richmond, and it was good seeing you all. You all have a great night. We look forward to serving you in the future. Call or write anytime. And one more time, welcome to the League of Cities. We're glad to have you all here. See ya.
Welcome, y'all. Thank you and congratulations. See you soon.